You ever drive past an old rural orchard and feel like it's watching you back? Like the rows aren't just trees, but a crowd standing still, waiting for you to step between them. Tonight's story is about an orchard that didn't grow fruit for people. It grew bait. And the first time I tasted it, I realized hunger can be trained. I moved out to the county for quiet. That's what I told everyone, and that's what I told myself. A small rental house on the edge of farmland, cheap enough to feel like a break and far enough from my old life that I could pretend I was starting over. The landlord called it a working property. He meant the fields still got used, the fences still got patched, and the orchard behind the house still produced enough apples to make the place smell sweet in late summer. He said I could pick whatever I wanted as long as I didn't break branches. He said it like a gift, like rural life was generous that way. The first week was normal. Morning fog. Crickets at night. A neighbor who waved from a tractor and never stopped to talk. The orchard sat behind my house like a green wall, rows of trees lined so neatly it looked man-made in the way a graveyard looks made. I didn't go in. Not right away. Orchards have a certain silence, even in daylight. A hush that feels like the trees are listening. Back home, as a kid, I used to run through them without thinking. Out here, I caught myself staring at the first row from my back porch and feeling a mild, irrational pressure in my chest. Like stepping into those rows was stepping into a decision. The first apple one ate came to me instead. I found it on my porch step, centered on the doormat like someone had placed it there. It was perfect. Red, glossy, no bruises, no wormholes, stems still green like it had just been picked. I looked around for a prank. The yard was empty. No footprints in the dust. The neighbor's house was too far to see anyone. I should have thrown it away. Instead I picked it up. The skin felt cool and smooth, and it smelled like fresh fruit and something faintly floral, like perfume washed over leaves. I bit into it. The crunch was loud in the morning quiet. The taste hit my tongue sweet enough to make my eyes water. Not candy sweet. Clean sweet. Like the first cold sip of water when you've been thirsty too long. I ate the whole thing standing there, juice running down my wrist, and when I swallowed the last bite I realized something. I was still hungry. Not normal hungry. Not breakfast hungry. A hollow pull in my gut like the apple had made space instead of filling it. Like it had opened a door in my stomach. I went back inside and made eggs, ate toast, drank coffee. The hunger stayed. It settled into me like a small animal refusing to sleep. That afternoon I walked to the edge of the orchard with the kind of purpose you pretend is casual. The rows opened in front of me, long tunnels of branches and green leaves. The ground beneath was packed dirt with scattered fallen apples that looked older, browned, soft. The trees themselves looked healthy, but the air between them felt cooler, damp, as if the sun didn't reach inside properly. I stepped into the first row. The orchard swallowed sound. The moment I crossed that invisible line, the world changed volume. The highway noise vanished. The birds quieted. Even my own footsteps sounded muted like I was walking on carpet. I stopped and listened. Somewhere deeper in the trees, something clicked. Not a bird. Not a branch snapping. A deliberate click like teeth tapping together. My skin prickled. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer, maybe a raccoon. I kept walking, eyes scanning the branches. Apples hung above me in clusters, red and bright. Too bright. In the shade, they looked like drops of blood suspended in leaves. I reached up and twisted one free. The apple was cold, colder than the morning one had been. The skin felt tight, almost too tight, like it was stretched over something firm. I brought it to my nose. That faint floral smell was stronger now. Under it was something else, subtle but wrong. A copper note like pennies. I didn't bite. I held it and kept walking. The deeper I went, the more I started noticing little things that didn't add up. Scratches on tree trunks at shoulder height. Not claw marks, not from deer antlers. Too regular, like fingernails dragged down bark. And the fallen apples on the ground, some of them had dents that looked like bites, but the bites were too wide, too human, and they cut too clean. I stopped at the end of the row where it met a narrow service lane between trees. There was a ladder leaning against a trunk. Old aluminum, weathered, but standing steady as if someone had placed it recently. No one was there. I looked up into the branches above the ladder. The leaves shifted slightly though there was no wind. A shape hung among the apples. At first I thought it was a sack. Then I saw the curve of a shoulder. A person, hanging upside down, wedged in the branches like they had fallen and been caught. Their clothes were torn and damp. Their hair hung toward the ground in dark ropes. My throat went tight. I took a step back. The person's head lifted. Their eyes were open. They looked straight at me. And they smiled. Their mouth opened wider than it should have, stretching skin at the corners, and their teeth clicked softly together, once, twice, like that sound I heard earlier. Then, without moving their body, they spoke. In my voice. "You're hungry, aren't you?" My stomach lurched. The apple in my hand nearly fell. I backed away fast, heartbeat roaring, but my feet felt heavy like the orchard floor had turned to mud. The hanging person's smile grew wider. They began to chew. There was nothing in their mouth, no apple, no food, but their jaw worked steadily as if they were savoring something. The clicking of their teeth filled the lane like a metronome. I turned and ran back down the row. Branches grabbed at my sleeves. Leaves brushed my face. My lungs burned. The orchard stayed too quiet, like it refused to acknowledge my panic with sound. Behind me, I heard something drop. A soft thud on dirt. Then footsteps. Not running. Walking. Steady, unhurried steps following the path of my retreat. I didn't look back. I burst out of the orchard into open yard and sound returned all at once. Birds, distant traffic, wind and grass. Relief hit me so hard my knees almost gave. I ran into the house and slammed the back door, locking it, then locking it again like extra clicks could help. The hunger in my gut sharpened. Not worse, exactly. More focused. As if my fear had flavored it. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the door and tried to breathe. That's when I noticed the apple still in my hand. I hadn't dropped it. I stared at it in the bright kitchen light. The red skin looked glossy, perfect. Then the surface shifted. Not like rot. Like expression. A shallow dent formed near the top, then another, symmetrically placed. 2 eye sockets. A longer curve formed below them. A smile. The apple's skin pulled inward as if a face was pushing from inside, molding it like clay. I couldn't move. The smile deepened. And the apple made that clicking sound again, tiny and delicate, like seeds tapping together. Then, in my voice, it whispered. I threw it across the kitchen. It hit the wall and burst, spraying pale flesh and seeds across the paint like shrapnel. The smell that filled the room wasn't apples anymore. It was copper and damp earth. Outside, the orchard rustled, though the wind had died. Then came the softest sound from the back porch. Something placed gently on wood. I held my breath. Another soft placement. Then another. Glassy little thuds, careful and patient, like offerings being arranged. I crawled to the front window and peeked out. On my back porch, a neat row of apples sat beside the doormat. 10 of them. All perfect. All red. And as I watched, one of them shifted slightly, the skin dimpling as if something inside was smiling. That night I didn't sleep. I kept every light on and stayed in the living room with a baseball bat across my knees. The hunger kept gnawing at me until it felt like my stomach was emptying itself. At 2:26 a.m., the back door handle turned softly. Then again, like someone testing it politely. A voice came through the wood, gentle and familiar, shaped like comfort. My voice. You can't fight hunger. You can only feed it. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the words seemed to leak through the house itself. The orchard wasn't just outside. It had gotten into me the moment I ate that first apple. The next morning I packed my truck. I didn't take much. I left the furniture. I left dishes. I left almost everything. Before I drove away, I walked to the yard edge and looked at the first row of trees from a safe distance. The orchard looked ordinary in daylight. Green leaves. Red fruit. A place you could take family photos in autumn. Then I saw it. Between 2 trunks at the start of the row, something stood perfectly still. A human shape, half hidden by leaves. It didn't wave. It didn't move. But from where I stood, I could see its mouth working slowly as if chewing something sweet. And I could hear the faint click of teeth carrying across the yard. One last message, quiet and certain. The orchard would wait. Because it didn't need to chase. Sooner or later, everyone gets hungry. If you grew up in the country, you know every property has a rule that nobody explains. Do not cut across that field. Do not go into that shed. Do not open that door. Tonight, I am telling you about the rule I inherited with a piece of land and the well behind my grandfather's barn that never stopped being hungry. When my grandfather died, the farm went quiet in a way I did not expect. I thought it would feel peaceful, like an empty room after a party, but it felt more like a place holding its breath. The kind of silence that is not empty, just waiting. Nobody in the family wanted it. The house was old, the roof had a few soft spots, and the nearest town was small enough to feel like it had one long street and a single mood. People said the land was good, but the work was endless. They told me I would regret it. I took it anyway because my life in the city had started to feel like a cage made of noise. I wanted a place where I could hear my own thoughts again. I wanted to sleep without sirens, to look up and see a sky big enough to make me feel small in a good way. The day I moved in, I walked the property line with a paper map and a bottle of water, like I was claiming something. The fields were mostly fallow, a mix of weeds and stubborn grass, and the barn sat behind the house like a tired animal, its paint peeling in long strips. The air smelled like sun-heated wood and old hay. Behind the barn, half swallowed by tall weeds, was the well. I remembered it from childhood. A circle of stacked stones sunk into the earth, a crooked wooden cover on top, an iron pulley above it, and a rope that looked too old to trust. My grandfather had shown it to me once when I was little. He had gripped my shoulder hard enough to make his warning feel physical. Never go near it at night. Never look into it. Never open it. He did not explain why. That was his way. He believed rules worked better when they stayed sharp and simple. As a kid, I obeyed. As an adult, I told myself it was superstition dressed up as wisdom. Old farms collect stories the way barns collect dust. I figured the well was dangerous, maybe unstable, maybe deep enough to turn a misstep into a funeral. Practical. Plain. The first week I stayed away from it. I was busy cleaning the house, sweeping up mouse droppings, sealing cracks, and learning which floorboards complained the loudest. At night, I sat on the back steps and listened to crickets and distant frogs, letting the quiet settle into me. But the well kept pulling at my attention like a magnet under the floor. Every time I walked behind the barn, my eyes slid toward it. It was not just curiosity. It felt like the land was nudging me toward that spot, the way a tongue keeps worrying a sore tooth. On the seventh night, a storm rolled in. Thick clouds covered the stars, and the wind came in gusts that made the trees bend and sigh. I was making instant noodles when the lights blinked once, twice, and then died. The house went black. Not city black, where streetlights leak through curtains. Rural black, where darkness feels like a substance filling every corner. I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside to check the breaker panel near the barn. Rain had not started yet, but the air was wet and heavy. The yard smelled like metal, like lightning was thinking about striking. As I walked, the night sounded wrong. No crickets. No frogs. The wind had stopped too, as if the storm had paused to watch me. The beam of my flashlight landed on the well. The wooden cover was slightly ajar. I stopped. My first thought was that wind had shifted it. My second thought was that there had been no wind for at least a minute. The cover lifted another fraction, slow and careful, like a person opening a door quietly so nobody hears. My throat tightened. I stood there with my flashlight trembling, the beam jittering over the stones. I should have walked away. I should have gone straight to the breaker and kept my attention on wires and switches, on things that made sense. Instead, I stepped closer and put my hand on the cover. The wood felt warmer than it should have. Not sun warm, body warm. I pushed it open. A smell rose up that did not belong to earth or water. It was warm, stale, and strangely familiar, like a basement where someone had been living for a long time. Under that was another scent, faint but sharp, like pennies on a tongue. I aimed the flashlight down. At first I saw only darkness and wet stone. The beam did not seem to reach the bottom. The walls looked slick, like they had been licked clean. Then, far below, something caught the light. 2 points. Eyes. They reflected my flashlight beam the way animal eyes do, but they did not blink. They just held the light, steady and patient, like they had been waiting for me to finally do what I had been told not to do. My breath hitched. I stepped back, heels scraping stone. From deep below, a voice rose up. It was not loud. It was not even clear. It was more like a whisper riding a draft, and it sounded enough like my grandfather that my stomach turned. "You came back." My skin prickled. I felt suddenly embarrassed, like I had been caught doing something childish. Then fear followed that embarrassment, cold and sharp. I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry. The smell of pennies got stronger. The voice came again, a little clearer. "You were not supposed to come back." I slammed the cover shut so hard the wood cracked. I stumbled away from the well, nearly tripping in the weeds, and forced my legs to keep moving toward the breaker panel. My hands shook as I opened the metal box and flipped switches, trying to make the world normal again. Nothing happened. The power stayed out. When I turned around, the well cover was closed. Perfectly closed. Like it had never been open at all. The storm hit a few minutes later. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder rolled. I spent the night on my couch with a lantern and a kitchen knife I did not believe would help me, listening for sounds that did not fit. I heard none. That silence was worse. In the morning, sunlight made everything look harmless. The yard was sparkling with rain. The barn was just a barn. The well was just a circle of stone with a cover on top. I told myself I had imagined it. The power outage, the storm, my tired brain building ghosts. Then I saw the rim of the well. There were fingerprints in the damp grit on the stones. Small, smeared, as if someone had gripped the edge and hauled themselves up, then slid back down. I stood there staring at those prints until my knees felt weak. That is when the dream started. The first dream was simple. I was standing at the well with my flashlight. The cover was open. I was leaning in and the air smelled like pennies and warm breath. The eyes were there, deep below, looking up at me. The voice whispered my name. In the dream, I wanted to step back, but my feet would not move. It felt like the ground was holding my shoes. "Come closer," the voice said. I woke with my heart pounding and sweat cooling on my skin. In the morning, I found dirt under my fingernails. I scrubbed them clean and told myself it was from working outside. But I had not worked outside the day before. I had spent the afternoon unpacking boxes. On the second night, I dreamed I was pulling the rope, lowering the bucket into the darkness. The rope slid through my hands too smoothly, like it was being pulled from below. When I felt the bucket stop, I tried to lift it, but it was heavy, heavier than water. Then I felt something tug on the rope. Not the weight of a bucket, but the pull of a hand. I woke to a faint wet smell in my bedroom. On the third morning, my hair was damp, as if I had leaned into fog. My pillowcase smelled like rain that fell into a basement. I tried to be practical. I called a local contractor about sealing an old well. When he asked for the address, he went quiet, then said he did not service that area. I called another. He asked for the crossroad name and made an excuse about being booked for months. I drove into town for supplies and decided to ask someone face to face, because people lie differently when you can see their eyes. At a small roadside stand, an elderly woman sold eggs and homemade jam. She recognized the farm name when I mentioned it. Her mouth tightened like she had bitten something sour. When I asked about the well, she set the egg carton down gently, like sudden movement might draw attention. "Your grandfather fed it," she said. I asked what that meant. She looked past me, over my shoulder, toward the road, as if she expected something to be standing there. "He did what he had to do," she said. "The land is not free. Not there." I asked her to explain. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped them on her apron. She told me an old story, the kind that has been told so many times it becomes part of the soil. A drought long ago. Crops dying. Cattle thin. A family desperate enough to dig deeper than any well should go. They hit something that was not water. Something that moved in the dark and made promises in a voice that sounded like loved ones. The bargain was simple. The land would drink and the land would give, but the well would never be empty. It would always need. Need what? I asked. She finally met my eyes. It needs the ones who look at it, she said. It learns them. It keeps them. I laughed weakly, because that is what people do when fear feels too close. But the woman did not laugh. She just took my money, handed me the eggs, and told me to leave the farm if I still could. That night, I decided I would. I packed a bag. I loaded my truck. I told myself this was ridiculous, but I did it anyway because my dreams had started to feel less like dreams and more like invitations. I got into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine clicked once and died. I tried again. Nothing. I popped the hood and stared at the battery. The terminals looked clean, almost polished. The cables were tight. Everything looked fine. Still dead. As I stood there, the radio in the truck crackled on by itself. Static poured out. Under it, faint but unmistakable, was a voice that sounded like my grandfather on a tired evening. "You cannot leave it hungry." I slammed the radio off so hard my hand hurt. From behind the barn came a long creak. The sound of the well cover opening. I froze. The yard felt colder, like the air had been drained of warmth. The storm clouds had returned, low and heavy. I told myself I would not go. I told myself I would stay in the truck until sunrise. I told myself I was not a child anymore. Then I noticed something else. A pale light moved inside the barn. A sweep of illumination, like someone carrying a lantern. I had locked the barn. I was sure I had. The light paused, and for a moment it shone through a crack in the boards, a thin blade of yellow. Then it moved toward the barn door. The door opened a few inches with a slow, deliberate push. I grabbed a tire iron from behind the seat. It felt foolish, but it felt better than empty hands. I walked to the barn, each step heavier than the last. The air smelled like wet hay and rust. Inside, dust floated through the beam of my flashlight. And hanging from a rafter, steady and lit, was my grandfather's old lantern. The flame did not flicker like normal fire. It burned too calm, too steady, like it did not need oxygen. Beneath it were footprints in the dirt floor. Wet footprints. Leading out of the barn. Toward the well. My throat tightened. I followed them because something in me understood a rule I had never been taught. Do not let it come to your door. If you can stop it, you stop it outside. The well cover was open when I reached it. The warm breath smell rose up stronger than ever. The penny's taste filled my mouth. The voice rose from below, gentle, almost pleased. "You brought light." I aimed my flashlight down. The eyes were closer now. Too close. I could see the shape around them, a mass of darkness clinging to the stone walls like wet cloth. It was not a face, not really. It was an idea of one, as if the well itself was learning how to make a person. I lifted the tire iron and shouted for it to go back down, for it to leave me alone, for it to stay in its hole. The thing laughed, and the laugh sounded like mine, but wrong, like a recording played at the wrong speed. A hand rose over the rim. Long fingers. Jointed in ways that did not match human bones. Skin like soaked bark, dark and slick. Water dripped from it, but when it hit the stones, it did not splash. The stones seemed to drink it. The hand slid along the rim slowly, feeling, searching. Then it stopped and pointed at me. "You looked," it whispered. "Now you are counted." A pressure built behind my eyes, as if fingers were pressing into my skull. Images flashed into my mind without permission. My grandfather here at night, younger, shaking, holding a sack that moved as if something inside was breathing. The sack dropping into the well. The cover slamming shut. The lantern going out. Feeding it. I stumbled back, gagging. My nose bled warm and sudden. The penny's taste was blood. The hand gripped the stones and pulled. The darkness rose with it, climbing without sound. I ran. I ran to the house, slammed the door, locked it, shoved a chair under the knob like that would matter. I stood there shaking, listening. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, at exactly 2:26 in the morning, there was tapping on the front door. Not a knock. Not urgent. Patient. Like a person who knows you cannot leave and does not need to rush. I held my breath and did not move. The tapping stopped. For a moment I felt relief, and then I heard something worse. Breathing on the other side of the door, slow and warm. Then the voice, soft as a memory. "You will learn." Morning came gray and thin. I stepped outside expecting to see wet footprints on my porch, scratches on my door, some proof that I was not losing my mind. There was nothing. The yard looked normal. The barn was still. The well cover was closed. My truck started perfectly. The engine purred like nothing had happened. I felt a rush of hope and disgust at myself for feeling it. I went back inside to grab my keys. They were not on the hook, not on the counter, not in my pocket. I tore through the house, flipping cushions, dumping drawers, swearing, sweating. Then I remembered the bucket. I walked to the well. The wooden cover sat neat and calm, like it had never moved in its life. The rope was coiled beside it, and the bucket was there, resting on the stones, as if someone had carefully lifted it up and placed it for me. Inside the bucket, sitting in damp darkness, were my keys. I stood there staring until my legs felt numb. I did not reach in right away, because I understood something then, something my grandfather had tried to teach with a simple rule. This farm was not an inheritance. It was a leash. And the well was not a hole in the ground. It was a mouth, and it had learned my name. It had learned my voice. And it was already practicing how to sound like someone I missed. When I finally lifted the keys out, my fingers came away wet. The water on them was warm, like skin. If you have ever lost a pet and caught yourself wishing for one more day, one more walk, one more moment where the house feels alive again, then you will understand why I did not turn away when the creek offered me something impossible. But I need you to hear this like a warning, not a comfort. Because sometimes what comes back is shaped like what you loved and nothing else. Bear died on a Tuesday, and the week after that felt like the world had been hollowed out and left standing anyway. He was 16. Old enough that every nap looked like a decision. The vet told me it was time, and I nodded like an adult, like someone capable of mercy, but inside I was still the person who found him as a pup, half-starved and stubborn, hiding under my porch. I did not want mercy. I wanted denial. When I drove home without him, the passenger seat looked wrong. Too empty. Too clean. I kept glancing over like I expected him to be there, nose against the window, watching trees blur past, tail thumping whenever we crossed a bridge. At the farmhouse, I carried his blanket inside and set it on the living room floor without thinking. The house had always smelled like him in small ways. Warm fur in winter, damp dog in spring, sun-baked paws in summer. Now the air smelled like dust and wood and me. I buried him by the creek because he loved that creek more than anything. It ran along the far edge of the property, narrow and shallow, with smooth stones and a big sycamore leaning over the water like an old man eavesdropping. Bear used to stand belly deep in the current, letting it cool his joints, staring downstream like he was guarding something. I dug until my palms blistered. The soil near the creek was soft, dark, and wet. The whole time, the air felt heavy, like it was waiting for a sound I could not hear. When I finally lowered him into the ground, I wrapped him in his blanket and whispered apologies I did not fully understand. I covered him up and pressed the dirt down with shaking hands, then put a flat stone on top so the coyotes would not dig. When I finished, the creek made a sound like a sigh. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the dark living room, listening to the refrigerator hum and the faint creaks of an old house settling, and I kept expecting to hear Bear's nails clicking on the floor. Every time the wind shifted outside, my body reacted like his bark might follow. On the third day, the first strange thing happened. I woke up and found muddy paw prints on my porch. Not random prints. Not scattered. They came up the steps, paused near the door, and then turned away like someone had been there, waited, and left. Bear's prints. Bear had one paw that dragged slightly because of his hip. That drag left a thin smear beside each front left print, like a signature. The prints on the porch had that same smear. I stood there staring until my throat tightened. My first thought was that another dog had wandered through and my grief was playing tricks, but that smear was too specific. Too intimate. Like handwriting. I followed the trail. It led off the porch, across the yard, and down the worn path toward the creek. The sun was still low, and the grass was wet with dew. The prints stayed visible in the damp ground, dark and clean, as if the dog had walked through fresh mud and stepped straight onto my land. My heart beat faster as I got closer to the water. The creek was low, like it had been drinking less lately. Stones showed above the surface, slick and shining. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold earth. The paw prints reached the bank and stopped. I stepped closer and looked across. On the far side, under the sycamore's shadow, a dog stood perfectly still. But I felt the world tilt. My breath caught so hard it hurt. For a second, my brain refused to process what my eyes were telling it. It tried to correct it. It tried to make it into something possible. A dog that looked similar. A coincidence. A cruel prank. Then the dog lifted his head and looked directly at me. He had bear's eyes. Not just the color. The expression. The calm intelligence. The way those eyes always seemed to understand more than they could say. I whispered his name without meaning to. But his tail wagged once. Slow. Deliberate. I took a step forward. My knees felt weak. Bear took a step too, toward the water's edge, but he did not cross. He stayed on the far bank, just beyond reach, as if there was a line he could not step over. Or would not. He looked wrong in a way my heart did not want to admit. He was too clean. Too young. His muzzle was darker, not gray. His coat looked thicker, like it did in his prime. His stance was strong, no stiffness, no hesitation, like he had never limped a day in his life. Grief surged up so hard I felt dizzy. I wanted to run into the creek, to splash across and grab him and bury my face in his fur and pretend time had bent for me. I moved closer to the bank. Bear's ears flicked, like he was listening to something behind him. Then he looked back at me and his mouth opened. That is when the wrongness became undeniable. Dogs pant. Dogs grin sometimes. But what Bear did was not panting or grinning. His lips pulled back too evenly, too smoothly, like a human smile. His teeth showed bright and uniform, like polished kernels of corn. He made a sound. At first it was almost a bark, but it stretched into something that made my stomach clench. A voice trapped inside an animal throat. Let me in. The words were soft, wet, and familiar, like someone whispering close to your ear. I took a step back without realizing it. Bear tilted his head. The creek's surface rippled, and for a moment, the reflection under him did not match his body. It was taller, thinner, like a person standing where a dog should be. The ripples smoothed and the reflection returned to normal, but my mind had already seen the truth. I backed away from the bank. Bear's tail stopped wagging. He watched me with a stillness that felt like judgment. Then he turned and walked along the far bank, parallel to me, keeping pace as I retreated. He moved without sound, paws silent on wet stone. Every few steps, he glanced at the water like he was checking the boundary. I turned and ran back to the house. It was not far, but I felt like I was moving through thick air. My lungs burned. My pulse hammered in my ears. When I reached my porch, I slammed the door behind me and locked it, then locked it again like the second click would matter. For a long time, nothing happened. I stood in the living room with my hands shaking, staring at the window. The yard outside looked normal. Sunlight. The barn in the distance. The creek line hidden by trees. Then near the back door I heard it. Scratch, scratch. Bear used to scratch the back door when he wanted in after a long roam. 3 quick scratches, then a pause, like he was politely asking. This scratching was different. It was too slow. Too steady. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Like a metronome. Like something practicing patience. I crept toward the window beside the back door and pulled the curtain back a fraction. The yard was empty. The scratching continued anyway, right on the other side of the door. My throat tightened. I forced myself to speak, because silence felt like consent. Go away, I whispered. The scratching stopped. For one breath, I felt relief. Then I heard a soft thump, like something pressing its weight against the door. A voice, low and close, spoke through the wood. Open it. It sounded like Bear's bark translated into language. Wrong cadence, wrong shape, but enough like him to make my eyes sting. I stepped back, shaking my head hard as if that could clear the moment. Oh, I said, The door handle twitched slightly, testing. My whole body went cold. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything went quiet. No scratching. No thump. No breath through the door. I stood there for a long time, listening. When I finally worked up the courage to look outside, the yard was empty. That night, I barricaded the back door with a chair. I kept the lights on. I did not sleep. Every time my eyes started to close, I heard faint claws on wood, just at the edge of hearing, like the house was remembering. In the early hours of the morning, I heard something else. A low whining sound. Bear used to whine when he dreamed. Soft little noises that made me smile even when I was exhausted. This whining came from outside, right under my bedroom window. It went on for a long time, and it sounded almost like a person trying to imitate a dog's sadness. I did not look. The next day, I tried to convince myself I was losing my mind. Grief can do that. Grief can paint a face onto a shadow and call it a miracle. So I did what people do when they want to make fear rational. I asked the neighbors. The nearest neighbor was a man named Curtis who lived a mile down the dirt road. He had a face like leather and hands that looked built for fencing wire. I caught him by his mailbox and asked, casually, if he had seen any stray dogs lately. He stared at me for a beat too long. When I mentioned Bear's name, his gaze dropped to the ground. That creek, he said finally, it's a returner. I waited. Curtis shifted his weight. He looked uncomfortable, like a man forced to talk about something that does not fit into normal language. Old folks used to say if you put something you love by that water, it brings it back, he said. My chest tightened. He held up a finger. Not the way you want. I asked what he meant. Curtis glanced toward my property like he expected the trees to be listening. The creek takes what it can, he said. Then it gives you a shape. Something familiar enough to open your door. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out thin. Curtis did not smile. He told me a story about a woman years ago who lost her baby during a winter fever. She buried the tiny body near the creek because the ground in the cemetery was frozen too hard. 3 nights later, she heard a baby crying at her window. She let it in. They found her in the spring with the windows all sealed shut. Her house was full of wet footprints and muddy handprints on the walls, like something had been climbing. There was no baby, Curtis said, just the sound. He told me to stay away from the creek and to never, ever let anything in that begged with a familiar voice. That afternoon, I drove into town and bought a new lock for my back door. I bought motion lights. I bought a bag of salt because I remembered some old superstition about water and thresholds and boundaries. When I got home, the sycamore by the creek was gone. Not fallen. Not cut. Gone. In its place was damp, smooth earth, as if the tree had never been there. Like someone had erased it from the landscape. The flat stone marker I had placed on Bear's grave was still there, but it was sitting on bare ground, not packed dirt. No mound. No disturbed soil. No sign of a burial at all. My stomach flipped. I walked closer, slow, as if the creek might react to speed. The air near the water smelled different now. Warmer. Like wet fur left in a closed car. Then I saw something in the mud along the bank. Footprints. Not paw prints. Bare feet. Small, childlike, toes splayed, the heel deeper like the person had been standing and shifting weight. The prints circled the creek over and over, as if someone had been pacing in a tight loop. I backed away from the bank, heart pounding. That night, the motion lights came on at exactly 1:17 a.m. I sat up in bed so fast my neck cracked. The room was suddenly bright with white light spilling through the curtains. I crept to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. There he was. Bear stood in the yard, directly under the motion light. He looked up at my window like he knew exactly where I was. His mouth was closed now. His tail hung still. He was not wagging. He was not panting. He was waiting. The light made his fur shine, and I saw something that had not been visible before. His shadow did not match him. On the ground, the shadow was longer, thinner, like a human body bent forward, with arms too long and hands too close to the ground. Bear lifted his head and opened his mouth. And this time, the voice that came out was not Bear's imitation of language. It was my own voice. It spoke my name the way I speak it in my head. So familiar. Like me comforting myself. Let me in, is it? I am cold. I stumbled back from the window, bile rising in my throat. The motion light stayed on. I heard slow steps on the porch. Not pause. Footsteps. What? Then the scratching started on the back door again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Then a pause. Then 3 knocks. Not a dog. A person. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm was careful, polite, practiced. I stood frozen, staring at the door, my mind screaming at my body to move. The salt bag was by the kitchen counter. I forced my legs to go. I ripped it open with shaking hands and poured a thick line across the floor in front of the door. The scratching stopped. For a moment, everything went so quiet I could hear my heartbeat. Then the voice came again through the wood, sweet and coaxing, in my own tone. You do not have to be alone. The door handle turned slowly, as if testing whether it was locked. It stopped. Then I heard something wet and gentle, like a tongue licking wood. The voice whispered, closer now, almost at the crack of the door. I'm right here. The motion light outside flickered once. Twice. Then went out. The darkness returned like a curtain dropping. In that dark, I heard the creak. Even from the house, I could hear it, louder than it should be, like water moving faster, like it was laughing softly over stones. I backed away from the door and did not sleep until the sun rose. In the morning, the salt line was undisturbed. No footprints. No scratches. But on the outside of the back door, carved shallowly into the wood, were marks like claws. And beneath those marks, pressed into the dried mud, was a single word written with a finger. Soon I sold the farmhouse within a month. I told buyers it was a quiet place, a good property, a perfect starter farm. I avoided mentioning the creek. I avoided mentioning bear. On my last day there, I drove away with my truck loaded and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. At the end of the driveway, just before the property line, I saw Bear one last time. He stood near the trees, half in shadow, watching me leave. He did not wag his tail. He did not bark. He only smiled that smooth, even, wrong smile, and I realized with a cold clarity that he was not upset I was leaving. He was patient, because he had learned my voice. And he knew, sooner or later, grief makes everyone thirsty. And the creek always offers a drink. Some rural places feel lonely in a way that makes old tragedies stick to the walls. Tonight, I am telling you about a barn I was warned to avoid, a song that only came at night, and the bride in the hayloft who wanted me to finish what someone else started. I moved to the countryside because I needed distance from everything that had been piling up in my life. I told people I wanted peace. What I really wanted was quiet enough to forget my own name for a while. A friend of a friend rented me a room on a working farm. The main house was big and drafty, with floors that creaked like they were trying to speak. The landlord, a man named Don, was friendly in the way rural folks can be, helpful but guarded. He gave me the key, showed me the kitchen, pointed out the bathroom, and then, as if he had almost forgotten, added one more thing. Do not go into the old barn, he said. Best why. Structural issues, he said, like he was reading from a script. The roof is bad. Ladder is unsafe. That barn is not used anymore. His eyes did not quite meet mine when he said it. He looked past me, toward the back of the property where the old barn sat, half hidden behind a line of dead trees. I nodded like a responsible tenant. Then I did what I always do with rules that have no explanation. I stored it in my mind and waited for curiosity to turn it into a problem. For the first week, I had enough to do. I settled into the room, unpacked, and tried to learn the rhythm of the farm. Mornings smelled like coffee and feed. Evenings smelled like damp grass and old wood. The days were honest in a way city days never are, full of chores and weather and simple hunger. The old barn stayed in the background, a dark shape behind the newer structures. It leaned slightly as if tired. Its paint was gone in places, exposing gray boards that looked like old ribs. The first time I heard it, I thought it was the wind. It was late. I was half asleep, drifting, when a sound slipped through my cracked window like smoke. Singing. Soft, feminine, slow. It was not loud enough to be clear, but it was steady, like someone humming a lullaby with purpose. It rose and fell in a way that made my skin prickle. Not because it was scary, because it was sad. I sat up and listened harder. The song did not come from the house. It came from outside, from somewhere farther back on the property, from the direction of the old barn. I told myself it was a radio in a neighboring house. But there were no neighbors close enough for that, and the melody did not sound like something played for fun. It sounded like something sung to keep from screaming. The next night, it happened again. Same time, just after midnight. Same drifting, aching melody. On the third night, I followed it. I put on boots and a jacket and took my flashlight. The night air was cold enough to sharpen my breath. The sky was clear and full of stars, and the farm lay quiet except for distant insects. As I walked, the singing got clearer and my stomach tightened. It sounded like a woman singing to someone who was not there. Her voice was steady, but under it was a tremble, like the last thread of control. The old barn stood ahead, darker than the night around it. My flashlight beam slid over its doors, and I saw something that made my throat go dry. A chain hung across the double doors, but it was loose. Unhooked on one side. Placed there like a warning rather than a lock. I reached out and touched it. The metal was cold and slightly damp, as if it had been handled recently. The singing came from inside. I pushed the barn door open just enough to slip through. The smell hit me first. Dust, dried hay, old manure turned to memory, and something else I could not place at first. A faint sweetness, like perfume trapped in cloth. My flashlight beam cut through the dark. The barn interior was cluttered with forgotten things. Broken tools. Rusted buckets. A sagging stack of old boards. Cobwebs strung like lace between beams. The singing drifted down from above. The Hayloft. A wooden ladder ran up the left wall, old and steep, each rung worn smooth. Don had said it was unsafe. Looking at it, I believed him. The song changed slightly and I felt it in my chest. A pull. An invitation. I climbed. The ladder creaked under my weight, complaining with each movement. Dust fell into my eyes. My flashlight shook as my hands tightened on the rungs. Halfway up, the air changed. It got warmer, thicker. The perfume's smell grew stronger, like someone had sprayed it recently. It did not smell like modern perfume. It smelled like something old, floral and powdery, like the inside of a dresser drawer. The singing stopped. That silence was not empty. It was alert. When I reached the hayloft, I lifted myself onto the platform and aimed my flashlight across the hay. At first, I saw only mounds of dried grass and scattered wooden crates. Then I saw her. She sat in the hay, back straight, hands folded in her lap like a statue posed for a photograph. A woman in a wedding dress. The dress was old, yellowed with time, but still elegant. Lace sleeves. A long skirt spread around her like spilled milk. A veil draped over her face. I froze, my heart hammering. The flashlight beam trembled on her veil. I could not see her eyes through it, but I could feel the direction of her attention. She turned her head toward me. Slowly. Her movement made no sound in the hay. A cold crawled up my spine. I should have run. But my body felt locked in place, as if the hayloft air had thickened into glue. The woman lifted one hand and touched the veil near her mouth. The veil fluttered slightly though there was no breeze. Then it lifted just enough for me to see her lips. They were stitched shut. Twine, rough and dark, threaded through flesh in neat, cruel loops, pulling her mouth into a forced line. Not messy, not rushed. Careful. Deliberate. I swallowed hard and tasted bile. She lifted her hand again and pointed at her left ring finger. No ring. Then she pointed down toward the ladder, and then toward the barn floor as if indicating a path. Her movements were slow, almost gentle, like she was trying not to frighten me. But the stitched mouth was a scream no sound could hide. I backed away one step. The boards behind me creaked. Not from my weight shifting. From someone stepping onto the ladder. I whipped my flashlight toward the opening in the hayloft. The beam landed on the ladder's top rungs. Empty. But the creaking continued. Slow, steady, one rung at a time, like an invisible person climbing. My breath came fast and shallow. I backed farther away from the ladder, toward the far end of the hayloft, where the hay lay piled high. The bride's head tilted slightly, as if listening to the same sound. Then she turned her stitched mouth toward me and lifted her hand again, palm up. "Come here," the gesture said. Oh. The creaking on the ladder stopped. Something shifted in the shadows below, a soft scrape against wood. Then the singing began again, but different. It was closer, as if the voice was right under the hayloft platform. The melody was the same, but now it had words, faint and broken, like a prayer remembered wrong. I could not make out all of it, but one line cut through clear as a knife. "Finish the vow." My legs trembled. I did not want to move. I did not want to stay. The bride lifted her veil a little higher, just enough for the flashlight to catch her eyes. They were open too wide. The whites showed all around, as if she had never blinked since the day she died. Tears tracked down her cheeks in dried, dark lines. She reached into the hay beside her and pulled out something small. A ring. Gold, dull with age. She held it out to me. My hand moved without permission. I stepped forward, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. Her fingers were cold when I took the ring, cold like metal left in a freezer. The moment it touched my skin, the barn air shifted. The singing stopped. A new sound rose from below. A low, wet chuckle. The boards under my feet vibrated slightly, like something heavy had shifted its weight on the barn floor. I turned toward the ladder opening. The darkness there looked thicker now, almost solid, like a curtain. A figure stood at the base of the ladder, barely visible in my flashlight beam. Wearing something dark that swallowed light. I could not see its face, but I could feel it looking up at me. The bride's hand clamped suddenly around my wrist. Her grip was shockingly strong. She shook her head once, slow. "Do not give it to him," her eyes said. My throat tightened. I looked down at the ring in my palm. It looked ordinary. It should have been harmless. From below, the figure began to climb. This time the ladder creaked with real weight. One rung, then another. Slow, patient. The same patience as the creak, as the well, as anything that knows time is on its side. The bride tugged me backward, away from the ladder. She pressed the ring into my hand harder, forcing my fingers to close around it. Then she pointed to the far wall of the hayloft, where an old trapdoor sat half buried under hay. It looked like it led into the barn roof space. The figure climbed higher. The creaking became louder, closer. The bride's stitched mouth moved slightly, the twine pulling at her flesh, and for a moment I thought she might try to speak. Instead, a sound came out through the stitches, a muffled, wet whisper that made my stomach twist. "Hide." I ran. I stumbled through hay toward the trapdoor, nearly falling. My flashlight beam bounced wildly. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. Behind me, the ladder creaked faster now, like the climber had decided patience was no longer necessary. I reached the trapdoor and yanked it open. Dust exploded into the air. A narrow, dark space gaped above, filled with the smell of old wood and bird droppings. I hauled myself up and pulled the trapdoor closed behind me. Darkness pressed in. My flashlight beam made the space feel smaller, the rafters closer. Below, I heard the figure step onto the hayloft. The boards groaned. Then silence. For a long moment, there was no sound at all. I held my breath, listening so hard my ears rang. Then I heard something soft. A dragging sound across hay. Slow. Circling. Like someone searching. Then the bride's singing started again, but now it was right below the trapdoor, so close the wood vibrated with it. The melody was the same, but the tone had changed. It was not sad now. It was urgent. A warning, wrapped in music. The figure's voice rose, deep and calm. "Give me what is mine." My fingers tightened around the ring. It felt heavier now, as if it had gained weight in my palm. I pressed my other hand over my mouth to keep from making noise. The figure moved, footsteps slow, then stopping, then starting again. I imagined it standing under the trapdoor, head tilted, listening to my breathing. Then the trapdoor handle twitched. Twice. I bit down hard to keep from crying out. The handle moved again, slower this time, like a hand testing the latch. Then the bride's singing cut off abruptly. A soft thud followed, like a body dropping into hay. My stomach clenched. I heard the figure inhale. A long, satisfied breath. Then it spoke again, almost kindly. "She cannot help you now." The trapdoor handle stopped moving. Footsteps retreated across the hayloft. The ladder creaked again as the figure began descending, unhurried. When the last creak faded into the barn below, I stayed frozen in the roof space for what felt like hours. Eventually, my legs cramped. My throat burned from holding breath. I forced myself to move, to lift the trapdoor a fraction and peek. The hayloft was empty. No bride. No figure. No ring in my palm. My hand was open. Empty. But on my left ring finger, cold and heavy, sat a gold band that had not been there before. I stumbled down the ladder and out of the barn, gasping like I had been underwater. I ran back to the house and locked the door and turned on every light. At dawn, I confronted Don. I told him what I saw. His face went pale in a way that made him look older. He did not ask questions. He did not deny it. He only asked one thing. "Did you take the ring?" he said. I looked down at my finger. "Yes," I whispered. Don closed his eyes like he was bracing for pain. "Then you need to leave," he said. "Today." Asked why. I demanded answers. I wanted him to tell me it was a prank, a hallucination, anything. He shook his head. "That ring is not a ring," he said. "It is a claim." I stared at him, confused. He swallowed. "There was a wedding here a long time ago," he said. "The bride tried to run. The groom did not like that. Nobody stopped him. Nobody did anything. They found her in the hayloft later with her mouth sewn shut so she could not scream. My skin crawled. Don's voice lowered. They buried her without the ring. Without the vow finished. Folks said her spirit stayed because it was not done. But that is not the worst part. I asked what was worse. Don looked toward the old barn, and his face tightened. "The groom still comes back," he said. "Not as a man. Not as anything human. He comes to collect what he believes is his." I held up my hand, the ring catching light. Don nodded once, grim. "He has you now," he said. "Unless you give it back to the right one." I asked what he meant by the right one. Don's eyes met mine, and I saw honest fear there. "The bride," he said. "You have to return the ring to her hand. In the hayloft. Before he comes to take you down." That night, I did not stay in my room. I did not pack like I was moving. I packed like I was fleeing. And just before midnight, as I carried my last box to the car, I heard singing drift across the fields again. Only now, the melody was not a lullaby. It was a countdown. And from behind the old barn, something answered the song with a slow, wet chuckle. I did not sleep at all after Don told me what the ring meant. I sat on the edge of my bed with my packed bag at my feet, staring at my left hand like it belonged to someone else. The band looked dull in the lamplight, but every time I tried to twist it off, it refused to move. It was not tight in the normal way. My finger was not swollen. It simply would not slide. I tried soap. I tried oil. I tried pulling until my skin turned red and the tendons in my wrist ached. The ring stayed where it was, cold and certain. Around 11:30 p.m., the house shifted with a long groan, like the old wood was settling into a deeper sleep. The sound made my nerves jump. I checked the window. The yard was still. The newer barns sat like dark blocks. The old barn was farther back, a deeper shadow among shadows. Then the singing returned. It did not float in from far away like before. It was closer now, as if it had walked up to the property line and stopped, waiting to be noticed. A woman's voice, thin but steady, threaded through the night. The same melody, only now the rhythm felt like footsteps. 1, 2, 3. A slow count hidden inside notes. My stomach tightened. Don had said I needed to return the ring to her hand before he came to take me down. The words took me a moment to understand fully. Take me down did not mean scare me. It did not mean chase me off the land. It meant exactly what it sounded like. It meant my body would be found somewhere later, if it was found at all. I went to the kitchen and poured water I did not drink. My hands shook hard enough to make the glass rattle. I looked for a weapon and hated myself for how quickly I chose the heaviest thing I could hold, a short-handled splitting maul Don kept by the back door for kindling. I had never swung it at anything living. I hoped I would not have to. At 11:57, the singing stopped. The silence that followed was not calm. It was alert, like a predator pausing before it moves. Then I heard the first sound from the yard. A step on gravel. Not hurried. Not searching. A single, deliberate crunch. My skin went tight all over. Another step. Crunch. Then another. The sound moved from the driveway toward the side path that led past the newer barns and back toward the old one. Whoever was walking did not come straight to the house. They were going the long way, like they had done it before and like taking their time. I stood frozen, maul in hand, listening. The steps stopped. For a beat, everything was still. Then I heard something soft that made my stomach drop. A laugh. Low but amused. It was not loud enough to echo, but it was close enough to feel. My eyes slid toward the back door, toward the dark glass. I expected to see a face pressed there. Nothing. The ring on my finger suddenly felt heavier, like it was responding to the presence outside. A dull ache spread up my hand into my wrist. Then, right behind me in the quiet kitchen, I heard a faint creak. The floorboard near the pantry. It was the same board I had stepped on a dozen times that day. But my feet were not moving. I turned, maul raised, heart hammering. The pantry door stood slightly open. I knew it had been closed. The crack widened another fraction, slow as breathing. The smell that slipped through was old hay and powdery perfume. My mouth went dry. I backed away from the pantry. The door stopped moving. For a moment, I stood there trembling, and then I understood what was happening. This was not only about the barn. The barn was the center, but the ring was a tether. It was a claim, and the claim reached wherever I was. If I ran, it would follow. If I stayed, it would come. So I made the only choice that felt like a choice at all. I was going back to the barn. I stepped out into the night, locking the door behind me, not because a lock mattered, but because it made me feel like I had drawn a line. The cold air hit my face and snapped my thoughts into sharper pieces. Stars hung above like indifferent eyes. I walked fast, maul in one hand, flashlight in the other. The beam cut across grass and fence posts and the edges of the newer barns. Everything looked normal. Ordinary. That was the most frightening part. Halfway to the old barn, my flashlight flickered once. Then steadied. The ring ached again. I kept going. As I got closer, I smelled the perfume stronger than before, drifting out of the old barn like breath through teeth. The barn doors were shut, chain hanging loose. The chain did not clink in the wind because there was no wind. I pushed the door open. The inside was colder than the night outside. My flashlight beam slid across dust and old tools and the sagging beams. The hayloft opening loomed above like a dark mouth. And then I heard the singing again. Not from above. From behind me. The melody rose in the barn's lower level, close enough that I felt it against my neck. I spun around, light sweeping. Nothing. Just empty space and shadows. Then the ladder creaked. One rung. A sound like weight settling onto wood. I pointed my flashlight up at the ladder. Still nothing visible, but the ladder creaked again. Another rung. Something was climbing. My heart slammed against my ribs. I forced my legs to move and step toward the ladder, because the trapdoor to the roof space was up there, and because the bride was up there, and because there was nowhere else to go that did not feel like surrender. I climbed. Each rung complained. The moss weight pulled at my arm. Dust fell into my face. I tasted old hay and rust. Halfway up, the perfume grew thick enough to make my eyes water. Above me, the hayloft was darker than it had been the first time, as if the darkness had pooled there. I pulled myself onto the platform. My flashlight beam caught her immediately. The bride sat in the hay in the same place as before, posture perfect, hands folded. Her veil draped over her face. Her mouth was still stitched shut. But her dress looked fresher, as if the fabric had been recently washed and laid out. The lace seemed whiter. The skirt seemed fuller. Like something was preparing her. I swallowed hard and stepped toward her. The ring on my finger throbbed, pulse-like, matching my heartbeat. The bride's head turned toward me slowly. Her veil lifted a fraction, and her eyes met mine. They were still wide, still tired, but there was something new in them. Or hunger. She lifted her hands and held them out, palms up. Not begging. Waiting. I raised my left hand, and the ring caught the beam of my flashlight. As if reacting, The barn around us made a low groan. The beams overhead seemed to tighten, like the barn itself was bracing. Then I heard it behind me. A step onto the hayloft boards. Heavy. The boards bowed slightly under the weight. I turned. At the ladder opening, a figure stood half in shadow. Coat dark as wet soil. Its head angled slightly, as if listening to my breath. The flashlight beam hit its chest and slid off without finding details, like the darkness on it was thicker than cloth. It lifted its head just enough for me to see the shape of its mouth. It smiled. Not like a human smile. Like a cut. A slit too wide for a face, filled with pale shapes that looked like teeth at first. Then my brain corrected. They were not teeth. They were tiny white knots, like bones wrapped in tissue, packed tight. The figure took one slow step toward me. The bride's hands tightened into fists for a moment, then opened again. She pointed at the ring, then at herself, then at the figure. Her message was clear. Give it to me. Not to him. The figure spoke. Its voice was calm, deep, intimate, like a groom whispering into a bride's ear. You wore it well, it said. The sound made my skin crawl because it was not just a voice. It carried memories, like it had learned how to mimic warmth. I stepped back until my calves hit a mound of hay. The figure moved again, unhurried. It did not need to rush. It knew the ring was bound to me. It knew the barn was its place. It knew I was a visitor in a story that had started long before me. I lifted the maul without thinking, pointing it like a warning. Do not come closer, I said, and my voice shook. The figure paused. Then it laughed softly, wetly, like something amused by the idea of pain. You cannot hurt what you invited, it said. The bride suddenly made a sound through her stitches. A muffled, strangled whisper that felt like it tore her from the inside. The figure's head turned toward her slowly. That movement alone felt like cruelty. Not yet, it said. It stepped forward again. The ring on my finger tightened, not physically, but in a way I could feel in the bones of my hand. My arm felt heavy. My joints ached. The bride lunged. She moved faster than anything wearing a dress should move. 1 second she was sitting, the next she was right in front of me, her hands grabbing mine. Her fingers were cold, but not dead cold. Cold like water in a deep place. She gripped the ring and pulled. The pain that shot through my finger was blinding. I gasped and nearly dropped them all. For a moment I thought she was tearing my finger off. The ring slid. Just a fraction. The figure made a sound that was not a laugh this time. A sharp inhale, angry. May it said, and the calm tone cracked. The bride pulled again. The stitches on her mouth strained. Dark fluid seeped along the twine, like her body was fighting itself to speak. The ring moved another fraction. The figure surged forward in a sudden burst, faster than before, and the hayloft boards groaned under the speed. It reached out, and its hand looked wrong, longer than it should be, with fingers like bent roots. I reacted without thinking. I swung the maul. The metal head passed through the figure's arm with no resistance, like I had swung through smoke. But the impact still happened. Not against flesh. Against something else. The barn shuddered. Dust exploded from the rafters. The figure jerked back as if struck, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker across its posture. It was not afraid of me. It was afraid of the barn waking up. The bride pulled hard one more time. The ring came free. A sharp, hot pain burned my finger, and then the pressure vanished like a band snapping. The bride clutched the ring in both hands and pressed it to her chest. The figure made a sound like a growl trapped in a throat that was not built for it. The bride lifted the ring and, with trembling hands, slid it onto her own left ring finger. The moment it touched her skin, the air changed. The perfume scent surged so strong it made my eyes water. The hay rustled as if wind had rushed through it, though the barn doors remained still. The figure staggered as if pushed. The bride's veil fluttered, lifting higher. For the first time, I saw her whole face. Her skin was pale and tight. The stitches across her mouth were dark and old, but now they began to loosen, not unraveling, but sinking inward like they were being pulled back into her skin. Her lips parted. A real breath filled her lungs. Then she spoke, and her voice was no longer a song. It was a command. The word hit the barn like a hammer. The figure's coat rippled as if something beneath it was trying to hold shape. It took a step back, then another, forced by something it could not argue with. Its head snapped toward me, and the smile returned, thin and hateful. "This is not finished," it said. The bride turned slightly and looked at me. Her eyes were no longer pleading. They were warning. "Go," she said, and the word felt like she was giving me the only mercy left. I did not hesitate. I stumbled toward the ladder. My legs felt weak, like I had run for miles. Behind me, the figure moved, but not toward me. It was circling the bride, slow and furious, like a wolf around a fire. I climbed down the ladder so fast my hands burned. As my boots hit the barn floor, the singing started again above, but it was no longer a lullaby. It was a wedding hymn, distorted, stretched, layered with something deeper underneath that sounded like the barn itself humming. I ran out of the barn into the night air, gulping cold like it could clean me. Behind me, the barn doors slammed shut on their own with a force that made the ground jump. The chain clinked. But I did not stop running until I reached the house. I slammed the door, locked it, leaned against it shaking, and stared down at my left hand. My ring finger was bruised and raw, like something had gripped it too hard. But the ring was gone. For the first time since I arrived, the house felt quiet in a normal way. The silence was still, not waiting. I sat on the kitchen floor until dawn. When the sun rose, I went outside with cautious steps. The old barn stood in the distance, unchanged. But the air around it looked different, like heat shimmer, even though the morning was cold. I drove away that day, just like Dawn told me to. I never went back for the rest of my things. I never spoke to Dawn again. And I tried to convince myself it was over. Then, 3 weeks later, in a different town, in a different apartment, I woke up at 2:26 a.m. to the smell of powdery perfume. And from the hallway outside my door, I heard slow, polite footsteps. Crunch, crunch, then a soft, wet chuckle. And a voice that sounded like someone smiling without lips. "We are not finished." The sound in the hallway did not belong in an apartment building. That was the first thing my brain tried to hold on to, like logic could act as a lock. Apartments have neighbors. They have TVs and arguments and footsteps that hurry because people have places to be. They do not have slow, ceremonial steps that move like a countdown. Crunch, crunch. The floor outside my unit was carpeted. There was nothing to crunch. I sat up in bed, heart hammering, and the smell hit me harder. Powdery, floral, old-fashioned. Like something sprayed onto fabric and sealed away for decades. The same perfume that had clung to the Hayloft air. My mouth went dry. I swung my legs off the bed and stood, every muscle tight. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 2:26 in dull red numbers. The same time from the well story. The same time my body now associated with patience turning into action. The steps stopped right outside my door. Silence spread, heavy as wet cloth. Then came a sound so soft I almost convinced myself I imagined it. A fingernail sliding down the wood. Not scratching. Not frantic. Testing. I held my breath and stared at the door as if my eyes could force it to stay shut. The knob did not move. That should have calmed me. Instead, it made me colder because it meant the thing outside did not need to try the handle yet. It was not checking if the door was locked. It was letting me know it was there. In the quiet, I realized something else. The perfume was not just in the hallway. It was in my bedroom, thick in the air, as if someone had been standing over my bed for a long time. I turned slowly. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the streetlight leaking through the blinds. Shadows lay across the walls in neat stripes. Nothing moved. Still, I could feel a presence behind me. Not a person. A pressure. Like the air had been compressed. I forced myself to look toward the closet. The closet door stood open a few inches. I knew I had closed it earlier. I always closed it. It was one of those small habits that makes a new place feel controlled. The gap widened a fraction. No sound. Just the slow, careful movement of a door opening like something was exhaling. My skin went tight all over. From the hallway, right outside my front door, a voice spoke softly through the wood. It sounded warm, intimate, almost amused. "Open it." I stayed frozen, staring at the closet, while my mind tried to build a list of reasonable explanations. Sleep paralysis. A dream. An old building settling. A neighbor walking by. But my body knew better. My body recognized the perfume, the timing, the patience. The closet door creaked 1 inch wider. I stepped back until the backs of my knees hit the bed. My hand reached for my phone on instinct. No signal bars mattered here, but the shape of the device felt like a lifeline anyway. The screen lit my face. 2:26, no notifications. No missed calls. Nothing to pull me back into normal life. The voice outside my door spoke again, lower now, as if leaning close to the crack between door and frame. You gave it away. You think that ends it? My throat tightened. I did not answer. I did not want to give it my voice. I did not want to offer anything that felt like a thread it could tug. The closet door stopped moving. For a breath, everything was still. Then, from inside the closet, came a sound like fabric shifting, slow and careful, as if someone were turning in place. The smell of perfume intensified, and under it was a faint new smell. Dry hay. I backed away until my shoulders touched the wall. My mind flashed to the hayloft, to the trapdoor, to the bride's stitched mouth, and the way the groom's darkness had swallowed light. Dawn's voice echoed in my memory. That ring is a claim. I looked down at my left hand. My ring finger still carried a faint bruise, a shadow of pain in the skin. No ring. That should have meant freedom. But then the bruise began to ache, slow and deep, like pressure building under a healed wound. Something was tightening around it that I could not see. In the hallway, there was a soft knock. Not a normal knock. 3 taps, gentle, almost polite. Tap, tap, tap. The same careful rhythm I heard in the root cellar story before it even happened to me. My stomach turned. The closet door opened fully. And inside, in the dark between hanging clothes, I saw white fabric. Not just any fabric. A sleeve. Then a veil slid forward, brushing against my shirts like a hand moving through tall grass. The bride stepped out. Her dress looked cleaner than it had in the barn, as if the hay and dust could not cling to her anymore. The veil covered her face, but I could see the outline of her features under it. She moved without sound. Her hands were held low, fingers slightly curled, like she was trying to approach without frightening me. She stopped in the center of my bedroom. The apartment felt smaller with her in it. The air felt colder. The voice in the hallway made a low, pleased sound. Not laughter this time. A satisfied hum. Then it spoke through the door, gentle as a lover. There you are. The bride's head turned toward the door. Slowly. And for the first time since I had met her, I saw anger in her posture. Not frantic, not wild. Controlled. Focused. She lifted her left hand and raised it slightly, as if showing something. The gold ring glinted faintly through the veil. My breath caught. The ring was on her finger. She still had it. So why was the groom here? The bride turned toward me. Her hands lifted, and she reached out slowly, palms up. Not begging. Offering. Her fingers hovered near my bruised ring finger. I felt a sudden wave of cold, and then a new sensation. Like thread tightening around bone. The bride's muffled voice came, not from her mouth, but from somewhere inside the veil, like sound pressed through cloth. He followed you, that's it. The words were faint, strained, like speech was still difficult. I swallowed hard, but the bride's head tilted. Because you witnessed, she said, and because you carried the claim, even briefly. He knows you now. In the hallway, the door handle finally moved. Slow. Testing. The lock clicked once, as if pressure had been applied just right. My blood went cold. I had locked the door. I was sure I had. The bride's hands closed around my left hand suddenly, firm and cold, and she pulled me toward the bedroom window. Her grip was strong in the same way it had been in the hayloft, like desperation had muscles. She pointed toward the fire escape outside my window. I shook my head automatically. I lived on the 3rd floor. The fire escape was narrow, metal, and exposed. But the door handle turned again. The lock clicked a second time. The apartment building itself seemed to hold its breath. The bride leaned close, veil brushing my cheek. The smell of perfume surrounded me like fog. If he enters, she whispered, he will not stop at you. The words hit hard. In my mind, I saw the building's hallway, all the doors, all the sleeping strangers behind them. I saw the figure moving down the hall, testing handles, patient and smiling. My fear shifted shape. It sharpened. The door lock clicked. Then came a sound I will never forget. A slow, wet inhale from the other side of the door. Like a mouth tasting the air. The bride tugged my hand toward the window again. I moved. I did not think. I acted. I shoved the window open. Cold night air rushed in, tearing through the perfume fog. I climbed out onto the fire escape, the metal cold under my palms. The bride followed. She moved with impossible grace, dress trailing like water, veil fluttering in a breeze that should not have existed. Behind us, my apartment door opened. I heard it swing inward, slow and deliberate, as if whoever entered wanted to savor the sound. Then the voice, now inside my home, spoke softly. "There you are." I scrambled down the fire escape ladder, hands slipping, heart pounding. The bride descended behind me without noise, her dress never catching where it should have. She moved like she belonged to the metal and dark. At the bottom, we stepped into the alley behind the building. The air smelled like trash and damp pavement. Normal city smells that should have comforted me. But the perfume was still there. The bride grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward the street. I ran, half dragged, half leading, my eyes scanning for anyone, any light, any open business. The streets were empty. The city at 2:26 a.m. is not lively. It is just a quieter kind of lonely. Behind us, on the fire escape above, I heard metal creak. A slow, steady weight descending. Not hurried. Patient. The groom was following. I turned my head just enough to see a shape moving down the fire escape ladder, dark against darker, swallowing the streetlight glow. It moved like a man, but too smooth, too sure-footed, like gravity was something it negotiated with. The bride pulled harder. We rounded a corner and my lungs burned. My fear made everything sharp. Every shadow looked like a hiding place. We reached an intersection where a street light flickered weakly. Under that sickly light, the bride stopped. She turned to face me. She lifted her left hand, showing the ring. Then she lifted my left hand, touching my bruised finger with cold fingertips. The ache in my finger flared. The bride's voice came soft, urgent. "He is tied to the claim. But he is also tied to the vow." I stared at her, confused, shaking. Her veil lifted slightly, and I saw her eyes clearly. They were not pleading anymore. They were determined. She pointed at my mouth. Then at the ring. Then at her stitched mouth. "Finish it," she whispered. My stomach dropped. She wanted me to speak the vow. Not for marriage. For release. Behind us, the metal creaked again, closer now. The bride reached up and, with trembling fingers, lifted her veil fully off her face. Her mouth was no longer stitched shut. The twine had sunk away, leaving marks like old scars. She could speak now. But she did not. She stared at me as if my voice mattered more than hers, as if I was the witness who had to seal it. The dark figure stepped around the corner into the streetlight glow. For the first time, I saw more of it. Its coat was not cloth. It looked like layered shadow, rippling slightly, as if something underneath shifted. Its face was hard to focus on, like my eyes slid away from it. But the mouth was clear. A thin slit stretching too wide. Packed with pale, bone-like knots. It smiled at the bride, then at me. Almost tender. "Say it," it whispered. The bride's hand gripped mine and pressed the ring against my bruised finger, not putting it on me, but forcing me to feel its cold circle. My mind raced, trying to remember any wedding vow, any phrase that could mean completion. I had never been married. I had never memorized vows. But I knew the shape of them. The purpose. To bind. Or to break. The bride's eyes locked on mine. She nodded once, slow. "Speak not for love," her expression said. "Speak for ending." The figure took a step closer. The streetlight flickered overhead. I felt the air thicken with perfume and old hay, as if the barn was bleeding into the city. So I spoke. Not in perfect ceremonial words. Just the truth shaped like a vow. I said that what was taken was returned. I said that what was claimed was released. I said that no bond made in cruelty could hold. I said until death did part, and I meant the death that had already happened. The bride's shoulders dropped slightly, as if something unclenched in her. The ring on her finger glowed faintly in the streetlight, brighter than gold should. The figure's smile faltered. Its head tilted, listening, as if the words were hooks pulling at it. It took another step forward, then stopped abruptly, like it had hit an invisible barrier. The bride raised her left hand, palm out. "Leave," she said, and this time her voice was clear, steady, powerful. The air snapped. Not a sound like thunder. More like tension releasing. The figure shuddered, coat rippling violently. Its mouth opened wider, and a sound came out that was not human, not even animal. A dry rasp like husks being crushed. It reached out with one long hand toward me, fingers bending like roots. The bride stepped between us. Her dress flared slightly as if caught by a wind that only existed for her. She lifted her ring hand and pressed it against the figure's chest. The figure jerked back as if burned. The street light above us burst with a sharp pop, plunging the corner into darkness. For one breath, I saw nothing. Then, in the dark, I heard the figure retreating. Not footsteps. More like something sliding backward across reality. A soft, wet chuckle faded into distance, but it no longer sounded pleased. It sounded angry. When the street light flickered back on, the corner was empty. Only the bride remained. She stood still, veil gone, face pale, eyes fixed on the space where the groom had been. The perfume smell faded slowly, like fog lifting. I exhaled, shaking so hard I had to brace a hand on my knee. "Is it over?" I whispered. The bride looked at me. For the first time, her expression softened. Not happy. Not relieved. Just less trapped. "Not finished everywhere," she said. "But finished for you." Then she lifted her hand and slid the ring off her finger. My heart jumped, fear returning like a reflex. But she did not offer it to me. She held it out into the air, toward the empty street, and let it drop. The ring did not hit the pavement. It fell and vanished, as if it had dropped into a hole that was not visible. The bride's shoulders loosened. She looked at the sky, at the narrow strip of it between buildings, and I saw something like grief cross her face. Then she stepped backward, not walking away, fading, like smoke thinning. Her dress dimmed, her face blurred. The perfume scent dissolved into cold night air. In a few seconds, she was gone. I stood alone under a flickering streetlight, in an alley that smelled like trash and damp brick, trying to understand what had just happened. When I returned to my apartment, the door was open. Inside, nothing was broken. Nothing was moved. Except for one thing. On my bedroom floor, beside my bed, lay a single piece of twine. Sticky with something that looked like dried blood. And when I touched my ring finger, the bruise was gone. But the skin there carried a faint indentation, a memory of pressure, like a ring that had been worn for a very long time. I moved again after that. Different city, different building, different locks. I never stay anywhere long enough for the night to learn my routine. Sometimes, though, when the clock flips to 2:26, I smell perfume in the air for just a second. And somewhere far away in my memory, I hear the Hayloft bride humming, not a lullaby, not a countdown. A song that sounds like freedom. A song that sounds like something finally ending. Every small town has a place people avoid without admitting it. An orchard nobody tends. A pond nobody swims in. A stretch of woods where the air feels heavier. Tonight, I'm telling you about the orchard behind my farmhouse, the apples that should not have existed, and the moment I realized the trees were not growing fruit. They were growing a way to hold on to you. I bought the farmhouse because it was cheap and far enough away from everything that my phone went quiet. The realtor pitched it like a dream for someone who wanted space. A few acres, a barn, a root cellar, and a neglected orchard that used to be the pride of the county before disease and time took it down. She said orchard like it was a bonus. The first day I walked the land, I believed her. The orchard sat behind the house beyond a line of scrub trees, a neat grid of old apple trees with twisted trunks and low, heavy branches. Most of them looked half dead, bark splitting, limbs scarred by storms. But they still held apples. That surprised me. Late season, sure, but not that late. Not with trees that looked like they had been forgotten. The apples were beautiful in a way that felt staged. Smooth skin, deep red, glossy even under gray sky. They hung low as if offering themselves. I picked one and weighed it in my hand. It felt warm. That was the first wrong detail. It had been cool outside all morning, but the apple felt like it had been lying in sunlight. I told myself it had, even though the clouds had not broken once. I bit into it anyway. The flesh was crisp for the first second, sweet and sharp. Then my teeth hit something hard. Not a seed. A tooth. My stomach turned so fast I gagged. I spat the bite into my palm and stared at what I had pulled out of my mouth. A human tooth. Off-white, with a root still attached, slick with apple juice. It looked real enough that my mind tried to reject it as impossible, but impossibility did not change the shape of it. I dropped the apple. It hit the ground with a dull thud and rolled, splitting open along the bite. Inside, embedded in the pale flesh, were more teeth. Not one or two. A line of them, set in rows like kernels in a cob. Some were small, like a child's. Some were larger, yellowed at the edges, like old molars. A few were broken, jagged, as if they had been ripped out. I stepped back, breathing hard, and a fly landed on the exposed apple interior. It crawled along the teeth as if that was normal. I turned and walked away fast, forcing myself not to run. Running would make it feel more real. Back at the house, I rinsed my mouth until my gums bled. I told myself it had been a prank. Someone had stuffed teeth into a rotting apple. Kids did gross things. Small towns got bored. But the apple had been hanging on the tree. Unless someone had climbed up and carefully grafted horror into fruit, it made no sense. The next day I went back with gloves and a bucket, determined to prove it was one rotten apple and nothing more. I told myself I would gather the strange fruit, throw it out, call someone, move on. The orchard was quiet. Too quiet. No birds. No rustle. I picked a different apple from a different tree. It was warm again. I peeled it open with my pocket knife instead of biting it. The skin parted cleanly. Neat, white teeth, embedded in the flesh like it had grown them. I dropped it. My eyes lifted up to the branches above me, and I saw something else I had missed the first time. Some apples were split already, just enough to show what was inside. Not seeds. And the way they sat in the fruit made the apples look like they were grinning. That was when I noticed the orchard did not smell like apples. It smelled like breath. Not rotten. Not sweet. Warm, faintly sour, like the air inside a mouth. I backed out of the orchard slowly, watching the trees the way you watch dogs behind a fence. I expected something to move, something to lunge. But nothing did. The trees just stood there, branches bowed under the weight of smiling fruit. That night the tapping started. It was not loud at first. A soft tick against the window, like a small pebble tossed from far away. I ignored it for a few minutes until it became rhythmic. Tick, tick, tick. I turned off the TV and listened. The sound moved, traveling along the side of the house, window to window, like something walking and testing glass. I grabbed my flashlight and moved carefully to the living room window. Outside, the yard was empty. The orchard line was darker than the rest of the yard, a mass of branches against night sky. Tick. The sound came again, this time directly against the living room glass. I lifted the curtain slightly. An apple sat on the outside window ledge. Fresh, glossy, warm enough that it fogged the glass around it. No tree branch reached that window. There was no way it had fallen there. My stomach churned. The apple was split open slightly, as if someone had cut it just enough to show me the inside. A perfect row, gleaming pale in my flashlight beam. And as I watched, the split widened a fraction. Not from rot. From pressure. The apple opened like a mouth. The teeth inside shifted, clicking softly together. I stumbled back, pulse roaring in my ears. The apple fell from the ledge and hit the ground. It did not splatter like fruit should. It made a wet sound like a tongue slapping. Then the yard went still again. I did not sleep much. I stayed up with lights on, checking windows, listening to the house creak. Around 2 a.m. the smell of breath returned, drifting through the vents as if the house itself had inhaled orchard air. In the morning, I forced myself to go into town and ask questions. I did not say the apple had teeth. I was not ready to see that look in someone's eyes. Instead, I asked casually about the orchard, about whether it had ever been sprayed with something, whether anyone still harvested from it. At the hardware store, a man with a gray mustache paused mid-sentence when I said the address. "That orchard," he said slowly, "you do not eat from that orchard." Best why? He looked around as if checking who could hear. "Because it is not yours," he said. I stared at him, confused. He leaned closer, voice lower. "The land is yours on paper. But the orchard keeps its own account." I asked him what that meant. He did not answer directly. He told me something else instead. He told me people used to go missing around there decades ago. Drifters. Travelers. Folks passing through who never made it to the next town. There were rumors, then, that the old orchard owner was mean, protective, not right in the head. But the owner died. The orchard stayed. And every few years, someone would buy the place and decide they could make a business out of it again. Fresh apple cider. Pick your own. Fall festivals. It never lasted. Sometimes the buyers left suddenly. Sometimes they were found walking down the road barefoot and confused like they had woken up from a dream. And sometimes, the man said, they were not found at all. I asked him if that was supposed to scare me into selling. He did not smile. "It is supposed to warn you," he said. "If the orchard offers you fruit, it is not offering you food." I drove home with my hands sweating on the steering wheel. The farmhouse looked ordinary under daylight. A quiet place. A property like any other. But when I pulled into the driveway, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The orchard trees looked closer. Not dramatically closer. Not enough that a casual glance would notice. But I had walked that yard the day before. I knew the spacing. I knew where the shadows fell. The orchard line had edged forward. By a few feet. As if the trees had leaned overnight. Or as if their roots had pulled them closer to the house. I walked toward them and stopped at the boundary of grass and orchard soil. The ground there looked darker, wetter than the rest, like it had been freshly turned. I crouched and touched it. It was loose. Not packed by time. Loose like something had been moving under it. I stood up fast, wiping my hand on my jeans. The orchard smelled stronger in daylight. The breath smell mixed with something faintly metallic. I backed away and decided, right then, that I would cut them down. I did not care about history or property value. I did not care about preserving anything. I wanted the orchard gone. I rented a chainsaw that afternoon and started with the first tree closest to the yard. The chainsaw roared to life, loud and comforting. The noise felt like power, like control. I pressed the blade into the trunk. The teeth of the saw bit into bark. And the tree bled. Not sap. Dark fluid, thick and slow, seeping from the cut like old blood. The smell that rose made me gag. It smelled like an infected mouth. I stumbled back, shutting the saw off. The sudden silence made the orchard feel even more alive. The cut in the trunk puckered. That is the only way I can describe it. The wood around the cut tightened, closing slightly, as if the tree were clenching. Then, from somewhere deeper in the orchard, a sound came. A click. Then another. Like teeth tapping together. The apples above me began to sway, though there was no wind. They moved in small jerks, like heads turning to look. The split apples opened wider, showing rows of teeth inside, and the clicking grew into a soft, collective chattering. My skin crawled. I backed away from the tree, chainsaw hanging useless in my hands. The chattering followed my movement, louder when I stepped closer, quieter when I stepped back. Like the orchard was communicating. Like it was warning me. I left the chainsaw on the ground and walked backward to the house without turning my back fully. When I shut the door behind me, the smell of breath lingered in my nose. That night, the orchard came to the house. Not as a storm. Not as something crashing. As a slow advance. I woke up around 2:26 a.m. to a faint creaking sound, like wood under strain. I thought it was the house settling until I heard it again, steady. Creak, creak, like branches rubbing together. I got up and looked out the window. The orchard was closer. This time, the difference was undeniable. Trees that had been 40 yards away now stood at the edge of the yard. Their branches reached over the grass like arms. And on those branches, apples hung low, split open, teeth visible, grinning toward my windows. One apple tapped gently against the glass. Tick. Then another apple tapped another window, answering. Tick, tick. A pattern. Like they were knocking. I backed away from the window, heart racing, and the tapping spread, window to window, like rain made of fruit. Then came a new sound from outside, low and wet. Chewing. Slow, deliberate chewing, as if someone were eating something tough with patience. My stomach turned. I forced myself to look again. At the edge of the orchard line, between two trees, something moved. Not a person. Not an animal. A shape low to the ground, sliding through weeds. It rose slightly, and I realized it was not moving on legs. It was moving on roots. A mass of roots, thick and tangled, pulling itself forward like a body dragging its own veins. Above that root mass, a trunk rose, twisted and bent, and where the trunk should have been solid wood, there was a split. A mouth. Not an apple mouth. A mouth in the tree itself, carved into bark and wood, lined with teeth the size of my fingers. It opened and closed slowly. Chewing. The teeth clicked and scraped as it worked. When it opened wider, I saw inside was not hollow. It was wet. Filled with pulsing fibers like tongue. I stumbled back and pressed a hand to my mouth to keep from making noise. The tree mouth turned, slowly, toward my window, like it had sensed me. And then from inside the orchard, came a sound like a sigh. The chattering stopped. The tapping stopped. Everything went still. The tree mouth held open for a moment, as if listening. Then it spoke. Not with a voice. With a sound that formed inside the wet wood. A soft exhale that shaped itself into words. Come outside. My knees went weak. I backed away, shaking my head hard. The window glass fogged, as if something warm breathed against it from the outside. Letters formed in the fog, traced by something unseen. Your turn. I did not open the door. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against it, clutching the splitting maul like a child clutching a toy, while the orchard knocked on every window and breathed against the glass until the first gray light of morning. When dawn finally came, the orchard had retreated a few feet. Not all the way back. Just enough to remind me it could. The chainsaw I had dropped the day before was gone. In its place, on the grass near the orchard line, sat a basket. Wicker, old, neatly woven. Inside the basket were apples. All of them split open, showing teeth. And one more thing. A small white object resting on top like garnish. A human tooth. Fresh. With a smear of blood still on the root. That was when I understood the truth. The orchard was not growing teeth because it was cursed in a random way. It was growing teeth because it was feeding. It took what it wanted from whoever lived near it, whoever looked too long, whoever believed they could own it. And it was offering me fruit not as food, but as an invitation to participate. A payment. I did the only thing I could think of that felt older than fear. I dug a trench between the orchard and the house and poured salt into it until my hands blistered. I called a priest and got laughed at. I called a botanist and got referred to pest control. I called a pest control company and they refused once they heard the address. So I stayed awake at night, listening. And every evening as the sun sank, the orchard inched forward again, barely, like a tide. I have not eaten an apple since. Sometimes, when I brush my teeth at night, I stare at my own mouth in the mirror and I think about the way those apples grinned. I think about the chewing sound in the dark. And I wonder, with a cold, sick certainty, whether the orchard is waiting for the day I slip up. The day I get tired. The day I step outside to check a noise. Because I know this now. The orchard does not want my land. It wants my teeth. And it is patient enough to grow them itself if it has to. You have seen them out there on back roads, little chapels and prayer boxes built by somebody's hands to keep travelers safe. But tonight's story is about a roadside chapel that was never meant to protect anyone. It had no cross, no Bible, no comfort. Only a door that wanted you to step inside and a mirror that remembered faces better than names. I was driving home later than I should have, the kind of late where you keep promising yourself you will never do this again. A long day in town, a shortcut suggested by my GPS, and then one misturn that became two, that became a loop I could not break. The road narrowed into gravel. Trees crowded close on both sides, their branches knitting together overhead like a tunnel. My phone showed 1 bar of service, then none. The map froze and spun like it was dizzy. I kept going because turning around felt worse. Rural roads at night do something to your judgment. They make you believe forward is always safer than backward. A few miles later, I passed a sign that should have helped, but it only deepened the wrongness. Chapel ahead, no name. No distance. Just that. The road bent through a shallow dip, and my headlights washed over a small white building on the right shoulder. It sat alone in a clearing like it had been dropped there by accident. A simple rectangle with a peaked roof, 1 door, 1 window. No lights inside. No cross. That detail hit me harder than it should have. Even the smallest rural chapel usually has something. A cross nailed above the door. A sign with a scripture. A wreath. Anything that signals purpose. This chapel had a blank wooden frame above the door, as if a symbol had been removed and nobody bothered to replace it. I told myself it was old. Abandoned. A tourist curiosity. But my hands tightened on the steering wheel and my throat went dry anyway. I drove past it. 2 seconds later, my headlights flickered and my engine stuttered like it had swallowed water. The truck slowed on its own. My foot stayed on the gas. The speed dropped anyway. I cursed and pulled over, gravel crunching under my tires. The engine died as soon as I stopped. Silence filled the cab. No radio. No wind. Not even insects. I turned the key again. The engine clicked once, then nothing. My phone had no service, and the screen showed the battery draining fast as if the cold was chewing it. I looked at the chapel. It sat there on the roadside, perfectly still, waiting in its little circle of darkness like it had been expecting me. I told myself I would just check inside for a landline, a breaker box, anything. It was ridiculous, but so was sitting in a dead truck on an empty road. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The air felt warmer than it should have been. Not comfortable warm. Breath warm. Like standing too close to someone. Gravel shifted under my boots as I walked toward the chapel door. The closer I got, the less my flashlight beam seemed to matter. The darkness around the building felt thick, like it absorbed light. The chapel door was not locked. It opened with a soft sigh, like a relieved exhale. Inside, the air smelled like damp wool and old wood. The floorboards were clean, almost polished. No dust. No cobwebs. No signs of abandonment. That should have been comforting. It was not. My flashlight beam moved across simple wooden benches, a narrow aisle, and at the far end where an altar should have been, something that made my stomach tighten. A mirror. Large, framed in dark wood, mounted at head height like a painting. In front of it sat a kneeler, its cushion worn and slightly indented as if someone used it often. There were no candles. No Bible. No cross. Just that mirror and the kneeler, like the chapel was built for one purpose only. To make you look at yourself. I took a step closer. My reflection stared back, pale in the flashlight glow. Tired eyes. Dust on my jacket. The flashlight beam shaking slightly. I told myself I would kneel for a second, just to rest, just to collect myself, then leave. I did not kneel. I leaned closer to the mirror instead, because curiosity is a hunger you do not always feel until you are already feeding it. My reflection blinked. Half a beat too late. My skin went cold. I blinked again, deliberately, testing. My reflection blinked late again. It smiled slightly, even though my mouth did not move. I stepped back so fast my heel hit a bench and I stumbled. The flashlight beam swung wildly, and for a moment the mirror reflection did not move with it. It stayed steady, eyes locked on me, smiling as if it enjoyed my panic. Then the reflection snapped into sync again, like it had remembered the rules of pretending. My breathing came fast. I turned away from the mirror and aimed my flashlight around the chapel. The benches were empty, but the air felt crowded now, thick with attention. Behind me, the mirror made a faint sound, a soft tap, like a fingernail touching glass. I refused to turn around. I walked toward the door, forcing my legs to move, and the door swung shut behind me with a quiet, final click. I spun back, hand reaching for the knob. It did not budge. But my throat tightened. I yanked again harder. Nothing. The flashlight beam shook. My heart hammered. From behind me, the mirror tapped again. The sound was patient, like someone politely asking for a turn. I backed away from the door, moving toward the benches, keeping my eyes on the dark corners instead of the mirror. I could feel it behind me like a stare on the back of my neck. Then the chapel window, the single one on the left wall, fogged. It fogged from the outside inward, as if someone had pressed warm hands to the glass. A shape appeared in the fog, a palm print, then another. I stared, frozen. A face pressed close from outside, but the fog blurred it. I could not make out features, only the outline of a head and the suggestion of eyes. Then the outline smiled. A smile too wide. The mirror tapped again, louder. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't take it. I turned. The mirror showed me kneeling at the kneeler. Only I was not kneeling. I was standing in the aisle with my flashlight. In the mirror, my reflection was on its knees with hands clasped, head bowed like it was praying. Then the kneeling reflection lifted its head and looked at me. Its eyes were darker than mine, like the pupils had swallowed the whites. It smiled without warmth. And it spoke, though I did not hear the sound so much as feel it in my teeth. Kneel. My mouth went dry. I shook my head. In the mirror, the kneeling version of me rose smoothly to its feet and stepped away from the kneeler, walking down the aisle toward the mirror's surface. It moved like it was walking toward a door. Toward me. The mirror's glass rippled slightly, like water disturbed by a finger. I stumbled backward, crashing into a bench. The flashlight fell from my hand and rolled, beams spinning across the chapel in dizzy circles. The mirror version of me reached the glass and pressed a palm against it. From this side, the mirror looked solid. From the inside, the palm pushed outward like something under thin ice. The glass bulged. My stomach turned. I scrambled for the flashlight, grabbed it, and pointed it at the mirror, desperate for a weapon made of light. The mirror version of me pushed harder. The glass bulged more. A crack formed at the edge of the frame with a soft, sharp sound. The chapel air grew warmer, heavier. The smell of damp wool thickened. Behind me, the door handle rattled once. Not from me. From the outside. As if someone else was trying to get in. Or get out. My mind snapped to one simple thought. This place is not a shelter. It is a trap. And the mirror is the mouth of it. I turned and ran at the door, throwing my shoulder into it. Pain shot through my arm. The door did not move. Behind me, the mirror cracked again. A thin spiderweb line spread across the glass. And through the crack, I saw something behind my reflection. Not the chapel interior. Something deeper. A hallway of darkness that did not belong to this world, stretching back like a throat. Shapes moved in that hallway, slow and indistinct, like people standing too far away. But their eyes were clear. They reflected light the way animals do. They were watching. I screamed and slammed my shoulder into the door again. This time the latch gave slightly with a dull pop, as if the lock had been waiting for me to try hard enough. The door swung open. Cold night air rushed in, clearing the thick chapel warmth like a slap. I stumbled out and fell onto gravel, scraping my palms. Behind me, the chapel door swung shut again by itself. I did not wait to see if it locked. I ran to my truck. The engine started on the first turn, eager, like nothing had ever been wrong. I did not question it. I drove. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to look in the rearview mirror for as long as I could. But the pressure in the cab built, the sense of being watched from inside the vehicle, from inside the glass. Finally, against every instinct, I glanced in the mirror. For a split second, I saw the chapel behind me, small and white in the distance. And standing in front of it, centered in my rear view, was a figure. Not waving, not moving, just standing, as if it had been waiting for a ride. Its face was pale and smooth, and even from far away I could see the smile. When I blinked, it was gone. I drove until the gravel turned back to pavement and a cell signal returned. I did not stop until I reached a gas station with bright lights and other people. I sat in my truck under those lights, shaking, trying to convince myself it was shock and exhaustion and nothing more. Then I looked at my phone. There was a new photo in my camera roll. I had not taken it. The photo showed the inside of the chapel. The kneeler, the mirror, and in the mirror's reflection, standing behind where I would have been, was someone else. A figure with my shape but not my face. Smiling. And on the mirror glass, written in fogged breath, were 3 words. See you soon. You ever pass a scarecrow and feel like it's facing you no matter where you go? Tonight's story is about a harvest season, a back road, and a scarecrow that did not guard crops. It guarded a boundary. And once I crossed it, it decided I belonged on the wrong side. The first time I noticed it, I was late for work and cutting through the back roads like I always did. 2 lanes of cracked asphalt, fields on both sides, and a sky still gray with early morning. The air smelled like wet soil and diesel. It stood at the edge of a soybean field, just beyond a shallow ditch. A scarecrow. That alone was not strange. Farmers used them sometimes, mostly out of habit, more decoration than deterrent. But this one looked too new. The coat hanging on its frame was clean, dark, and heavy like a winter coat someone had actually worn. Its hat sat straight on its head, not tilted or sagging. Its head was a sack, but the sack was tied tight and smooth, like a face with no features. No painted eyes. No stitched smile. Just blank cloth. It felt less like a scarecrow and more like a person trying very hard not to be recognized. I drove past and forgot about it until that evening. On my way back, the scarecrow was closer to the road. Not moved a little by wind. Not leaning. Closer, as if the farmer had picked it up and repositioned it. But there were no footprints around it, no disturbed dirt, no tire tracks in the field. The soil looked undisturbed, flat with dew. The scarecrow's blank head faced the road. Faced my truck. I remember thinking, that farmer has too much time. Then I laughed at myself, because imagining a farmer carefully rotating a scarecrow to stare at passing traffic was ridiculous. The next morning it was closer again. Now it stood near the ditch, where the grass was shorter, where it would be impossible to miss. And now it had a face. Not painted on. Not stitched. A face made of corn husk strips woven into a crude oval, with 2 dark holes where eyes should have been. The holes were deeper than cloth should allow, like the sack head had become hollow. I slowed without meaning to. The holes looked empty, but I had the strong sense something inside them was looking out. I got to work uneasy, and I told myself it was nothing. Sleep deprivation. Just rural creepiness doing what rural creepiness does. That afternoon, I went into town for groceries and took a different road home, one that looped wide around the fields. I did it without thinking, like a small superstition, like a child avoiding a dark hallway. I turned onto the final stretch that led to my farmhouse, and my stomach dropped. There it was again. The same scarecrow, same coat, same hat, standing at the edge of a completely different field. Not the soybean field from the morning. A cornfield now rose tall and dense. The scarecrow stood where the corn met the road, as if it had been placed there specifically to greet me. Its husk face was turned toward my truck. I felt cold spread through my chest. I drove faster, eyes locked forward, refusing to look at it longer than necessary. The logical part of my mind tried to fight. Maybe there are 2 scarecrows. Maybe the farmers use similar coats. Maybe I'm seeing patterns. But it felt the same in a way you can't explain. Like recognizing a person from a distance by the way they stand. That night I dreamed of fields. Not pretty fields. Fields as walls. Endless rows like prison bars. In the dream, my truck headlights cut through darkness, and every time they swept across the crops, I saw scarecrows in the rows, dozens of them, wearing coats and hats, all with husk faces turned toward me. Then one of them moved. Just a fraction. Just enough to make the dream go silent. It stepped out of the row and into the road, blocking my path. I woke up sweating, my sheets twisted around my legs like restraints. And in the quiet of the bedroom, I heard something outside. A soft scraping sound. Like dried plant stalks dragging across wood. I sat up and listened. The scraping came again from the front porch. Slow, deliberate. I got up and looked out my bedroom window. The porch light was out, but my motion sensor floodlight faced the driveway. It should have triggered if something was out there. It did not. I stared into the darkness until my eyes hurt, seeing nothing. Then, just as I was about to step away, something shifted in the black at the end of the driveway. A tall shape. Too still to be a person standing casually. It stood at the edge of my property where the gravel met the road, facing my house. Even without light, I knew what it was by the silhouette. A hat brim. A long coat. Arms held slightly away from the body like stiff branches. I stepped back from the window, heart hammering. I told myself not to go outside. I told myself it was a prank or a trespasser or my fear building shapes out of shadow. Then my phone buzzed once on my nightstand. No call. No text. Just a vibration. When I picked it up, the screen showed a single notification from an app one did not recognize, something I had never installed. Boundary crossed, my blood went cold. I deleted it immediately, but the fear stayed. The next morning, I found footprints in the gravel. Not boot prints. Not bare feet. Impressions like bundles of sticks pressed into the ground, uneven and angular, as if someone walked on a frame instead of feet. They started at the road and ended at the base of my porch steps. Then stopped. Like whatever had come there decided not to climb. Or decided it didn't need to. Not yet. I drove to work with my jaw clenched, eyes scanning fields, half expecting to see the Scarecrow at every turn. And I did. Not always. Not every field. But often enough that it stopped feeling like chance. Sometimes it stood deep in crops, between rows, barely visible. Sometimes it was right at the roadside, impossible to miss. Always watching. Always facing my truck. Always wearing that same coat. After 3 days of that, I snapped. I decided I would confront the farmer. I would find the landowner, tell him his prank had gone far enough, and demand he stop moving his Scarecrow around like a threat. At lunch I drove back toward the original soybean field, the place I first saw it. I pulled over near the ditch and parked, the engine idling. The field was empty except for the Scarecrow, which stood near the road like it had been waiting. I got out. The air smelled like hot asphalt and green plants. As I walked toward it, I realized there was no sound in the field. No birds. No insects. Just the faint tick of my truck cooling behind me. The closer I got, the more details became wrong. The coat was not just a coat. It was buttoned. Properly buttoned. The buttons were mismatched, like they had been collected one by one. The sleeves hung heavy, but they did not flutter in the breeze. The hat brim was clean, not sun-bleached, not cracked. And the face. The husk face was woven tight, but the eye holes looked deeper now, as if the inside of the head was not empty cloth but a tunnel. I stopped an arm's length away. The Scarecrow smelled faintly of damp earth and something older, like cellar air. Under that was a faint hint of smoke, like clothing dried near a fire. I reached out with 2 fingers and touched the coat sleeve. It felt warm. Not sun warm. Body warm. My hand jerked back. The Scarecrow did not move. But the husk face shifted slightly, a tiny turn of the head, as if it had noticed my touch and decided to acknowledge it. I stumbled back. My breath came hard. Then I heard a sound that made every hair on my arms rise. A soft crackle. Like dried corn husks rubbing together. The sound came from inside the Scarecrow. From its chest. Then, very faintly, a voice formed inside that crackle. Not loud. Not clear. But unmistakably shaped like language. My throat tightened. I backed away faster, turned, and walked back to my truck without running because running felt like surrender. When I reached my truck, I found the driver door open. I knew I had closed it. The interior smelled faintly of damp earth. I slammed the door, locked it, and drove away so hard the gravel spit behind my tires. That night, I did not turn on any music. I drove home in silence, jaw tight, eyes flicking to every field. I wanted to see it so I could prepare. I did not see it once. That was worse. Because when you stop seeing the threat in front of you, it usually means it has found a better angle. When I pulled into my driveway, my porch light was out again. I stopped my truck at the base of the porch steps and left the engine running. The headlights washed over the yard, making everything look flat and pale. Nothing stood there. No scarecrow. No figure. I sat frozen, listening. Then I saw it. In the far corner of the yard near the tree line, just beyond where the headlights reached, a tall shape stood perfectly still. Arms. Facing my house. Facing me. I reached for my phone. No service. Of course. I reached for the flashlight in the glove box and clicked it on. The beam cut across the yard and landed on the shape. It was the scarecrow. But now it looked different. It was closer to human height than before, taller than any simple wooden frame should be. The coat hung on shoulders that looked too broad, too naturally shaped, like bones under fabric. The husk face had changed again. It was smoother, more deliberate, like someone had woven it with skill. And the eye holes were deeper, darker, like wells. The scarecrow raised one arm slowly. Not a wave. A pointing gesture. It pointed toward my front door. Then it pointed toward itself. Then it pointed toward the road behind it. A simple message. Come out. Come with me. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I shook my head. The scarecrow stood still for a moment. Then it took a step forward. A real step. Not swaying on a pole. Not shifting in wind. A foot moved, weight transferred, grass bent. And the sound it made as it walked was not a footstep. It was the dry whisper of stalks brushing together. I slammed my truck into reverse, tires crunching, and backed down the driveway until the scarecrow was fully in my headlights. It kept walking. Slow. Patient. Like it knew I could not reverse forever. Its head turned slightly as if following me, and from inside its chest the husk crackle voice came again, clearer now. You crossed it. Now you return. I hit the gas and fled down the road, heart pounding, hands shaking on the wheel. I did not care where I went. I just wanted distance. But something strange happened as I drove. The road felt longer. Not physically. Not in miles. In sensation. Street signs repeated. A mailbox number I passed twice. A leaning tree I recognized, then recognized again. My headlights seemed to reach less far, like the darkness was thickening. And in my rearview mirror, far behind me, I saw a shape jogging. Not sprinting. Jogging. Keeping pace. Hat steady. Coat flapping only slightly. It never got closer. It never fell behind. It matched my speed like it was tethered. I drove until my gas light came on, then kept driving anyway. I told myself to find a place with people. A diner. A gas station. Anything. But every road I took curved back toward fields. Toward crops. Toward rows that looked taller than they should. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw lights ahead. A small gas station. One pump. A neon beer sign. A few cars parked. Relief hit so hard my eyes stung. I pulled in fast and jumped out, nearly running to the building. As I reached the door, I looked back at my truck. The scarecrow was gone. The road behind me was empty. I stood there panting, half expecting it to appear behind a pump. Nothing. Inside the station, a tired clerk looked up and asked if I was all right. I lied and said I hit a deer earlier and got spooked. He nodded like he understood rural fear. I bought a bottle of water I didn't drink and stood near the window, watching the parking lot. Minutes passed. Then the clerk's radio crackled with static. Under the static, a faint dry whisper threaded through. The clerk didn't react. Maybe he didn't hear it. I left before my courage ran out. When I drove back toward my house, dawn was starting to gray the sky. I thought maybe daylight would break whatever spell the road had tried to weave. But as I approached my driveway, my headlights caught something standing at the roadside, exactly where my property line began. The scarecrow. It was not in my yard anymore. It was right at the boundary. And in the pale pre-dawn light, I saw what it had been waiting for all along. A line of scarecrows stretched along the roadside in both directions, evenly spaced like fence posts. Dozens of them. Coats. Hats. Husk faces. Eye holes like wells. All facing me. all standing still. Except the one closest to my driveway, which lifted its hand slowly and pointed at me again. Then pointed at the field behind it. Then pointed at the road. The message was clearer now. You do not get to live here unless you join us. I backed up, shaking, and drove away from my own home without turning into the driveway. I never went back. Months later, I passed through that county again on a highway a few miles away. From the road, I could see the fields, neat and green. And along the edge of one field, near the old back road, I saw a line of scarecrows. They stood like a crowd at attention. One of them wore a coat I recognized. And though it was too far to see clearly, I knew, with a sick certainty, that its face was no longer made of husks. It was pale, smooth, and smiling, and it was facing the highway, waiting for the next person to cross the wrong line. Small towns have routines like heartbeat. The diner opens, the school bus rolls, and the milk stops coming when the dairy shuts down. But this story is about a place where deliveries never ended. Bottles kept appearing, cold against the porch boards, like the town was still paying for something nobody remembered agreeing to. The dairy in our county closed 10 years ago. Everyone knew it. The building still stood on the edge of town with its faded sign and cracked windows, like a monument to a job market that died quietly. The trucks were sold off. The routes were cut. The men who used to deliver milk every morning moved away or found other work. So when I found 3 glass bottles on my porch the first week I moved into the farmhouse, I assumed it was a mistake. They sat in a neat row right beside my doormat, beaded with condensation. The glass looked old-fashioned, thick and heavy. No labels. No caps. Just clear bottles filled with something pale and cloudy. Each bottle had a number scratched into the glass near the neck. 1, 2, 3. I stood there in the morning light, holding my coffee, trying to make sense of it. No tire tracks on my driveway. No footprints on the porch. Just 3 bottles like they had always belonged there. I did not pick them up right away. Something about the way the numbers were scratched made my skin itch. They were not etched clean like factory marks. They looked carved by hand, uneven and deep, like the glass had fought back. I grabbed one anyway, because refusing to touch it felt like admitting fear. The bottle was cold enough to sting my palm. The liquid inside was not milk. It was cloudy water with thin dark strands floating in it like hair, drifting slowly as I moved the bottle. My stomach turned. I poured it into the sink. It did not splash like water. It slid out thickly, like something reluctant to leave the bottle, and the smell that rose was wrong. Not sour milk. Not rot. Something faintly sweet and metallic, like pennies held under the tongue. The dark strands clung to the porcelain, sticking like wet thread. I turned on the faucet and flushed it hard, scrubbing the sink until the smell faded. Then I poured bottle 2. Same thing. Cloudy water. Dark strands. That coppery smell. Bottle 3 was worse. When I tipped it, the liquid came out slower, as if something inside was holding it back. The dark strands in it were longer, thicker, and when they slid into the sink, they twisted slightly as if they were still alive. I shut the bottle upright and stared at it, heart beating fast. Then, without thinking, I dropped it into the trash bag outside. The glass did not clink like it should. It made a dull thump, like it hit something soft. I told myself it was prank. 'Cause teenagers. Small town boredom. I told myself I would mention it to the neighbor when I met them, laugh about it, move on. That afternoon, I drove into town for groceries and passed the dairy building without meaning to. The sign still hung there, sun-bleached and cracked. A few weeds grew through the pavement. The loading bay doors were chained. As I drove past, something flickered in the corner of my eye. A truck. Not parked in the lot, not moving, just there for a split second like my brain had flashed an old memory on top of the present. A boxy white delivery truck with a rounded front and a logo that didn't exist anymore. When I looked again, the lot was empty. That night, I woke to the sound of an engine idling. Not the distant hum of highway traffic. Close, right outside my house. I sat up in bed and listened. My heart started pounding before my mind fully caught up. The engine sound was low and steady, like an old truck letting itself warm up. Then came another sound, softer. Glass clinking. One bottle touching another. Careful, gentle clinks, like someone stacking them with respect. I got out of bed and crept to the window. The curtains were thin enough to show shapes outside. My porch light was off. In the dim glow of moonlight, I saw the outline of a truck parked at the end of my driveway. No headlights. No taillights. Just a dark block against the yard. A man stood on my porch. He wore a milkman uniform. White cap. White jacket. Dark pants. The uniform looked too clean, too crisp, like it had never seen a day of real work. His back was to me. He faced my front door like he was waiting for someone to answer. In his hand, he held a glass bottle. He set it down on the porch beside the doormat with slow care, like he was placing something fragile and important. Then he stood very still. Not shifting weight. Not looking around. Just waiting. I watched him for a long moment, breath trapped in my chest. I wanted to turn on a light, to shout, to demand what he was doing on my property. But something in me refused. Because his posture was wrong. Too stiff. Too patient. And the air around him looked strange, like faint fog clung to his shoulders even though the night was clear. After a minute, he turned his head slightly, as if he sensed me watching. I pulled the curtain back quickly, heart hammering. The engine continued idling outside. I counted to 10, then forced myself to peek again. The porch was empty. The truck was gone. No fading headlights down the road. No sound of tires on gravel. Just absence, like it had been erased. But on my porch, right beside the doormat, sat a bottle. It had no label. No cap. Just a number scratched into the glass. For I did not touch it. I backed away from the window and stood in the dark hallway, shaking, listening for any sound that didn't belong. For the rest of the night, nothing happened. Morning came with pale winter sunlight. I went outside and stared at bottle 4 like it was a live animal. Condensation slicked the glass. The liquid inside looked cloudier than before. The dark strands floated thickly now, like a tangled nest. I picked it up with a grocery bag wrapped around my hand. It was colder than the others. Cold enough that my skin ached through the plastic. I carried it to the trash bin and dropped it in. This time, the glass clinked normally. A small relief. Until I noticed something else in the bin. The 3 bottles I had thrown out the day before were gone. The trash bag was still there, but it looked lighter, emptier. Like something had removed the bottles cleanly and put the bag back. My stomach turned. I drove into town and asked about deliveries at the grocery store, trying to sound casual. The cashier, a bored teenager, shrugged. No dairy trucks anymore, he said. I asked about old-time milk delivery, the kind with bottles. He laughed like it was a joke. That's ancient, he said. I went to the diner for coffee and asked the older waitress, the one with tired eyes and a voice that carried authority. When I mentioned the bottles, her face changed immediately. She refilled my cup without looking at me. You live on the old route, she said. My throat tightened. Old route, I repeated. She nodded once, slow. That dairy closed, but the route never ended. Not for some houses. That's why. Her mouth tightened like she regretted speaking. Because there's a debt tied to it, she said. Folks used to say the dairy didn't just sell milk. It sold time. It sold keeping things fresh. Keeping sickness away. Keeping children strong. People wanted it so badly they agreed to things they didn't read. I stared at her. She finally met my eyes. If bottles show up numbered, she said, do not drink. Do not pour it down the sink. Do not break them. And for the love of God, do not answer the door when he waits. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Who's he at? She looked away toward the kitchen, as if saying his name might summon him. The milkman, she said. But not a man. I drove home with my hands sweating on the wheel. Every tree along the road looked like it leaned toward me. Every mailbox number felt like a warning. When I pulled into my driveway, my porch was empty. No bottles. For a moment, I felt relief. Then I saw them. At the far edge of my property near the road, lined up along the ditch like sentries, were bottles. Not 4. But at least a dozen, all standing upright in the grass. Each one scratched with a number. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They ran in a line that disappeared into weeds farther down the ditch, continuing beyond what I could see, like a trail. My stomach dropped. It looked like someone had started laying out a path. A route. That night, I did not turn off my lights. I kept the TV on low for noise. I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand even though service was spotty, and I tried to keep my breathing steady. At 2:26 a.m., the engine sound returned, idling at the end of my driveway. Then the soft clink of glass. I did not go to the window this time. I sat in the hallway where I could see the front door and the back door at once, gripping a kitchen knife like it would make me brave. The porch boards creaked once. A slow step. Then another. Then a quiet clink as a bottle was placed on wood. I heard his breath through the door, not loud, but close enough to fog the gap at the bottom. Then came the polite knock. 3 taps. Tap, tap, tap. I held my breath. He knocked again. Tap, tap, tap. Then the voice came, muffled through the wood, smooth and gentle. Delivery. The word should have been harmless. It wasn't. It carried a weight that made my chest feel tight, like that one word contained a contract. I did not answer. The silence stretched. Then the voice spoke again, softer, like a friend trying not to scare you. You are behind. A slow cold spread through me. Behind as in late. Behind as in unpaid. I heard the faint click of glass again, and then something else, a sound that made my stomach turn. A wet swallow. Like someone tasting the air. Then the footsteps retreated from the porch, slow and unhurried. The engine continued idling a moment longer, then faded away without the sound of driving off. Just gone. When morning came, a bottle sat on my porch. 11, and beside it was something I had not seen before. A small folded piece of paper, damp at the edges, pressed under the bottle like a receipt. I opened it with shaking hands. The paper looked old, yellowed, like it had been stored in a drawer for decades. On it, in neat handwriting, were 3 lines. Account holder, current resident past due, 10 years payment due. Tonight my mouth went dry. I drove straight to the old dairy building. It was locked, chained, dead. But behind it, near the loading bay, there was a small door I had never noticed before. A side entrance, half hidden by vines. It was open a crack. The smell that leaked out was cold and sour and metallic. Like pennies. Like breath. I stood there for a long time, hand on the door frame, telling myself not to go in. Then I heard it from inside. The clink of glass bottles. Careful stacking. And a voice humming, low and content, like a man working through a routine he had done forever. I backed away. Because I understood something then, clear as daylight. The milkman was not delivering milk. He was delivering reminders. And the numbers weren't random. They were counting down. To the moment I stopped being a resident and started being payment. There's a folk figure some rural families whisper about like a weather pattern. Not a grim reaper with a scythe. Something older. Something tied to land and debt and the idea that a field always takes its share. Tonight, I'm telling you why my father never missed a harvest, and what walked out of my corn the first year I tried to skip it. My dad died mid-October, right when the fields turned gold and the air started to bite hard enough to make you pull your jacket tight. He was the kind of man who worked through sickness and grief and anything else, because the land does not care about excuses. He left me the farm. Not because he believed I wanted it, because he believed the farm wanted me. At the funeral, people told me I was lucky. Paid off land. Good soil. A place to raise a family. They spoke like the inheritance was a gift. But when the last casserole was eaten and the last neighbor drove away, the farmhouse felt heavy. Not haunted like in movies. Haunted like a place that remembers every footstep and expects the next one on schedule. I didn't want to farm. I told myself I would lease the fields to a neighbor or sell the whole property and move back to the city. I told myself I would not get trapped in my father's life. But the harvest came fast, and I was still there, surrounded by corn that stood tall and dry, rustling in the wind like paper. Dad would have been in that field every day. He would have checked moisture, watched the weather, planned the cut down to the hour. I did nothing. I let the days pass. The first sign something was wrong came in the form of crows. At first it was only a few, perched on the fence line, watching the yard like nosy neighbors. I waved at them and went back inside. The next morning, there were dozens. Then hundreds. They lined the fence posts, sat in the dead branches of trees, gathered in the field in clumps like spilled ink. The strangest part was the silence. Crows are loud creatures. They argue. They complain. They make the world feel alive. These crows did not caw. They did not flap. They just watched. Their eyes were shiny and still, reflecting light like black glass marbles. By the third day, there were so many that the yard looked peppered with shadow. They covered the barn roof. They crowded the power lines. They stood in the driveway as my truck rolled up, refusing to move until the tires got close enough to make them hop aside. Still no sound. It felt like the whole flock was holding its breath. That evening at dusk, I saw movement at the edge of the field. A figure stepping out of the corn. Not running. Not stumbling. Walking with purpose. He came up the driveway as if he owned it. He wore a coat made of dried leaves stitched together into something that looked almost like fabric. Every step made a faint rustle, like wind through dead branches. His hat brim was low, wide enough to shadow his face. His boots were caked with soil that smelled freshly turned. He stopped at the base of my porch steps and looked up. The crows shifted slightly, but stayed silent. The figure lifted his head just enough for me to see his mouth. It was full of corn kernels, packed tight where teeth should be. He spoke, and the sound was like husks rubbing together. "Your father paid on time." My hands went cold. I stood in the doorway, half behind the screen door like that thin layer of mesh could protect me. "Who are you?" I asked, and my voice came out thin. The figure tilted his head. "You know," he said, like it was a gentle correction. I didn't, but my body did. Some instinct in my bones recognized him the way animals recognize storms. "The harvest man," my mind whispered. The old story my father never told directly, but hinted at with rules and routines and the way he always harvested no matter what. The figure took one step closer. "You did not," he said. Behind him, the corn bowed as if something massive moved through it, a slow ripple traveling between rows toward the house. My stomach dropped. I swallowed hard. "I am leasing the field," I lied. "I am handling it." The figure's kernel mouth shifted slightly. "You are delaying." The crows on the fence line leaned forward as if listening. The harvest man lifted one hand. His fingers were long and thin, wrapped in dried plant fibers like twine. When he opened his palm, something fell out and landed on my porch step. A corn husk, folded carefully into a small envelope shape. I stared at it. The harvest man nodded toward it. "These." I didn't move. He waited, patient. Finally, with shaking hands, I picked up the husk envelope and unfolded it. Inside was a single kernel of corn. But not rotten, not moldy, black like coal. And scratched into the kernel, impossibly small, was a number. 7. My throat tightened. "What is this?" I whispered. The harvest man's voice softened, almost kind. "This is." Then his head tilted slightly. "Or nights, if you prefer." He turned away and walked back toward the field. The crows parted for him like a crowd making room. As he stepped into the corn, the ripple of movement behind him became clearer. The rows shifted, not from wind, but from something pushing through them, something large and slow. I shut the door and locked it, then locked it again, as if a second lock could erase what I had seen. That night I dreamed of corn. I stood in the field with stalks taller than me, dry leaves scratching my face. The air smelled like soil and old blood. Somewhere nearby, something moved through the rows, slow and heavy. Then the harvest man's voice whispered right behind my ear. I woke with my heart pounding and the taste of corn dust in my mouth. In the morning, the black kernel was gone. I searched the house. I checked the porch. Nothing. But on my kitchen table sat a fresh corn husk envelope. Inside was another black kernel. 6. I drove into town that day and asked the oldest man I knew, a neighbor named Earl who had farmed longer than anyone and still walked with the slow strength of someone who had never trusted machines fully. When I mentioned the harvest man, Earl's eyes narrowed. "You saw him," he said flatly. I nodded. Earl exhaled slowly. Your dad never missed a harvest, he said. Not because he loved it. Because he feared what happens when you don't. I asked what happens. Earl stared at his hands for a moment. The land gets paid anyway, he said. If you don't cut it, it cuts you. I demanded he explain, but Earl only shook his head. If you got a number, he said, you don't have time for stories. You got time for work. I went home with my stomach twisting. That evening, the crows were closer to the house. They clustered in the yard now, silent black shapes in the grass. Their eyes followed me as I walked to the barn. I started the combine my father had kept running like a relic. The engine coughed, then roared. The sound should have comforted me. It didn't. It felt like shouting in a church. I drove it to the edge of the field. The corn stood waiting. As the combine's header approached the first row, the stalks shivered. Not from wind. From recognition. I hesitated, hands tight on the controls. Then I heard the whisper again. I drove forward. The combine chewed into the first row of corn, stalks snapping and vanishing into the machine. The sound was loud, brutal. And from deep in the field, something answered. A low groan that made the ground vibrate. The crows in the yard all turned at once, their heads moving in perfect sync. Then they lifted off silently, a black wave rising and sweeping toward the field. I kept harvesting. Row after row, I worked until the sun dropped and the field turned to shadow. The machine lights cut through the darkness, making the corn look like walls. Then the combine stalled. Not from a clog. Not from a mechanical failure. It stalled like the engine had been gripped and held. The lights dimmed. The air went cold. My breath fogged. In front of the combine, the corn shifted. A path opened between rows, straight and clean as if something had walked through and pressed the stalks aside. The path led deeper into the field, beyond the reach of my lights. At the edge of the path, a corn husk envelope sat on the ground, placed neatly like an offering. My hands shook as I climbed down from the combine. The corn around me was too still. The wind had died again. Even insects were silent. I picked up the husk envelope. Inside was a black kernel. My throat tightened. 3 days left. Or nights. The harvest man's voice came from somewhere in the corn, close but unseen. Too slow, he said. I backed away, heart hammering. The corn rustled as something moved through it toward me, heavy and deliberate. I ran to the combine and scrambled up, slamming the door shut. The engine started again instantly, like it had only been waiting to prove a point. I drove hard, harvesting until exhaustion blurred my vision. When I finally stopped, dawn was breaking and the field was half cut. I stumbled into the house and collapsed. That afternoon, I woke to find another husk envelope on my kitchen table. 2 of the crows were on the roof. Silent. Watching. I forced myself back to the combine and kept going, cutting until my hands cramped. The machine's roar filled my head like a prayer. By sunset, the field was nearly done. Only one corner remained, near the far tree line where the corn grew thicker and darker. I drove the combine toward it. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt. The smell of soil sharpened. The corn leaves looked darker, almost bruised. Then the combine died again. The lights went out. The silence slammed down so hard my ears rang. I sat frozen in the dark cab. Outside, the crows began to caw for the first time. Not random caws. A chorus. A chant. And in the corner of the field, near the tree line, the corn bent as something rose from within it. Taller than a man. But slow. It stepped into the narrow strip of moonlight and I saw it clearly. A shape made of bundled stalks, bound tight with twine, with a head like a woven sack and a mouth full of black kernels. Not the harvest man, something he commanded. Something he sent when payment was late. It turned toward my combine and took one heavy step forward. The ground trembled. Then the harvest man's voice came calm and close, right beside my ear, though the cab was closed. What? My blood went ice cold. I grabbed the ignition and turned it. The engine did not respond. Outside, the stock thing took another step. Crows screamed. The corn around the cab began to lean inward, as if the field itself wanted to swallow me. I turned the key again, begging under my breath, promising anything. The engine coughed once. The harvest man whispered, almost gently, Finish. I slammed the controls forward and the combine lunged as the engine finally caught. Lights snapped back on, blinding bright. The stock thing stood directly ahead, closer than it should have been, its mouth open like it was ready to bite. I did not stop. I drove forward and the combine's header met it with a terrible crunch. Not like crushing wood. Like crushing bone. The machine shuddered. My stomach lurched. The stock thing vanished into the header, shredded, swallowed, and for a moment the combine screamed, metal grinding against something it should not have been eating. Then it cleared. Silence returned. I drove, shaking, and harvested the last rows until the field was done. When the final stalk disappeared into the machine, the wind returned suddenly, rushing through the cut field like a released breath. The crows lifted off and scattered, cawing wildly now as if freed from a spell. I sat in the cab, trembling, looking at the empty stubble where corn had stood. And in the distance, at the edge of the field, the harvest man stood beneath the trees. Hat low, leaf coat rustling softly. He raised one hand in something that looked almost like a salute. Then he turned and walked into the woods, disappearing as if he had never been there. I thought it was over. I thought paying on time meant safety. But that winter, when the first snow fell and the fields turned white, I found a corn husk envelope nailed to my front door. Inside was a black kernel, and scratched into it was a new number, 365, and underneath, in my father's handwriting on a strip of old paper, were 3 words that finally explained everything he never said out loud. Never miss again. Old rural homes have root cellars. Cool places for jars and potatoes and keeping food safe. But the farmhouse I bought had a door under the cellar floor that nobody mentioned in the listing. My aunt told me never to open it. I did anyway. And the thing knocking from the other side knew my mother's voice better than I did. The farmhouse came with what the realtor called charming storage. That was the phrase she used as she led me down a narrow set of concrete steps into the root cellar, her heels clicking like tiny hammers. The air down there was cold and damp, and the smell reminded me of wet dirt and old glass. Shelves lined the walls. Dozens of empty jars sat in neat rows, as if someone had cleaned them and never returned to fill them. The jars caught the realtor's flashlight beam and threw it back in dull glints. It felt like a place made for waiting. The realtor smiled too brightly and said the cellar stayed cool year-round, perfect for canning. I nodded and pretended I knew anything about canning. My mind was already moving on to the upstairs repairs, the roof line, the windows that needed sealing. If I had known what was under that cellar floor, I would have walked back up those steps and never returned. I did not see it on the day of the showing. The cellar looked ordinary enough, just another rural storage space that smelled like earth. The trap was hidden under a ragged rug in the far corner, the kind of rug that looks like it has been stepped on for generations. It took me a week to notice the draft. It was subtle at first. Every time I went down to the cellar, I felt a faint cold breath against my ankles, like air was moving from somewhere it shouldn't. I checked the window vents, looked for cracks in the foundation. I found nothing. The draft seemed to come from the rug. One afternoon, annoyed more than afraid, I kicked the rug aside. There was a metal ring embedded in the concrete floor. A pull handle. It was flush with the ground, like the top of a hatch. The metal looked newer than it should have, not shiny, but not rusted through either. Someone had maintained it. My stomach tightened in that instinctive way you feel when you find a door in a place that should not have one. I crouched and ran my fingers along the ring. It was cold enough to sting. I did not open it then. I told myself I would ask my aunt, because she had grown up in this region and knew the way old houses were built. Root cellars sometimes had secondary storage. Old storm shelters. Hidden cistern access. But even as I tried to think practically, the ring felt like an invitation. That evening, my aunt came over with a casserole and a list of chores she thought I should do before winter. She was the kind of woman who treated worry like a job. I mentioned the hatch casually, trying to sound amused, like I had found a quirky feature. Her face changed so fast it made my chest go cold. "Do not open it," she said. I laughed weakly. "It's just storage, right?" She set the casserole down harder than necessary. Do not open it, she repeated, and her voice had an edge I had only heard when she talked about car wrecks and house fires. Real danger. The kind that does not care if you believe in it. Best why. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes flicked toward the cellar door, as if even the mention made the house listen. Because it is not a storage door, she said. Then what is it, I asked. She hesitated, as if deciding how much truth I could handle. It is a door to what the house used to hide, she said finally. And it does not like being remembered. I wanted to press for more, but she refused. She changed the subject, asked about my job, about the neighbors, about whether the furnace sounded right. The whole time, her gaze kept drifting toward the kitchen floor like she could see through it to the cellar beneath. After she left, I stood at the top of the cellar stairs for a long time, listening to the house breathe. Curiosity is not always innocent. Sometimes it is a kind of hunger, and hunger makes you stupid. A week later, I opened it. Not because I wanted to prove my aunt wrong. Because the draft had gotten stronger, and because every night I could swear I heard something from the cellar. A faint tap, like a pipe contracting, like a jar shifting, like a rat. And because part of me had started to resent the idea that my own house had a secret I was not allowed to know. It was late when I went down, after midnight. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own footsteps sound like an intrusion. I took a flashlight, like light could make anything safe. The cellar air felt colder than usual. The jars on the shelves glinted like eyes as my beam moved. I pulled the rug aside. The metal ring waited. I gripped it. The cold shot up my arm. For a second I imagined a hand gripping back from the other side. I told myself not to be dramatic. I pulled. The hatch opened with a slow sigh, like pressure releasing from a sealed space. A smell rose up immediately, not mold, not earth, but something sour and stale, like breath trapped too long. Below the hatch was a staircase, going down into black. Not a short set of steps. Not a crawl space. A real staircase, disappearing into darkness so complete my flashlight beam seemed to shorten when it aimed down. I leaned over and shone the light. The beam caught the first few steps, stained dark with age. The walls on either side were rough stone, damp and slick. Farther down, the light faded into nothing. Then came the sound. Knocking. Slow. Careful. 3 knocks. Fuzz. 3 knocks. Tap tap tap. Fuzz. Tap tap tap. It was not coming from the house around me. It was coming from below. My throat tightened. I should have closed the hatch right then. Instead, I listened harder, like I expected it to become pipes or rats if I gave it enough attention. The knocking stopped. A silence filled the space, heavy and expectant. Then a voice floated up from the darkness. My name. Spoken in my mother's voice. So familiar. Gentle in exactly the way she used to say my name when she wanted me to come to her, when I was scared, when I had a nightmare as a child. My mother had been dead for 6 years. My blood turned to ice. I slammed the hatch shut so hard the ring clanged against concrete. My hands shook violently. I backed away, stumbling into the shelves. A jar tipped and clinked, and the small sound felt like a scream. Under the closed hatch, the knocking resumed. 3 knocks. Fuzz. 3 knocks. Patient. As if it had all the time in the world. I stood there in the cellar with my flashlight trembling, my breath fogging in the cold air, and I realized something. It was not angry. It was not rushing. It was waiting. That night, I did not sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with the cellar door shut and a chair wedged under the handle, as if a chair could hold back a staircase that led into someone else's dark. Around 2:26 a.m., the knocking stopped. I held my breath, listening. Then I heard something worse. The metal ring under the rug, 1 floor below me, clinked softly, as if someone had lifted it from the other side and let it fall. In the morning, sunlight made me feel foolish again. Fear always shrinks in daylight, like it is embarrassed to be seen. I went down to the cellar and pulled the rug aside. The ring lay flat, but the concrete around it was scratched. Fresh, shallow scratches circling the hatch like someone had tried to dig their nails into the stone. My stomach turned. I called my aunt and told her what happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, in a voice that sounded older than it had the week before, "You listened. I swallowed hard. I heard her. My aunt exhaled slowly. That is how it learns, she said. It listens to you listen. It learns what you miss. I asked her what it was. She didn't answer directly. She told me to meet her at the house that afternoon and not to go back down until she arrived. When she came, she brought 2 things. A bag of salt and an old key ring with a single tarnished brass key. She did not explain the key. She only told me to follow her. We went down to the cellar together. The air seemed colder with her there, or maybe my fear was remembering. She pulled the rug aside and looked at the hatch like it was a coffin. "Do you want to sell the house?" she asked. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. The house was my fresh start, my escape, my investment. But standing there, I realized none of that mattered if the dark under it wanted me. I nodded. "Then you need to close it properly," she said. She sprinkled salt in a thick circle around the hatch, her hands steady. The salt looked too bright against gray concrete. Then she placed the brass key on the ring and held it up. "This is not to lock it," she said. "It is to remind it that it does not own the door." She looked at me hard. "And you are not going to talk to it, no matter what voice it uses." My throat tightened. "What if it sounds like her again?" I whispered. My aunt's face softened slightly. "That is exactly when you don't answer," she said. She handed me the key. "Your job is to stay silent." Then she knelt and hooked her fingers under the hatch ring. My stomach clenched. "Do not open it," I said, voice shaking. "I have to," she said. "To finish what your grandfather tried to do." I stared at her. She pulled. The hatch opened with the same sigh, and the smell rose up again, thicker than before. My eyes watered. The staircase yawned black beneath us. The flashlight beam could not touch the bottom. The knocking started immediately, louder now. 3 knocks. 3 knocks. And beneath it, the voice rose again. My name. My mother's voice. "Please," it said softly. "Please come down. I have been alone." My hands trembled so hard I nearly dropped the key. My aunt's jaw tightened. She did not look down the stairs. She looked at the air above them like she was staring at something invisible. "No," she said firmly. The pause. Then the voice changed. It became my aunt's own voice. Saying her name the way I say it. Calling her like family. My aunt flinched just slightly. The only sign it touched her. It was testing. It was trying on voices like masks. My aunt held the key out over the opening, arm steady. "This is not yours," she said, voice clear. "This door is not yours." The darkness below seemed to press upward. The air got warmer, breath warm, like something leaning close. The knocking stopped. In the silence, a new sound rose. Breathing. Slow and wet. Right beneath the hatch. Like someone standing on the stairs just out of flashlight reach. My aunt's hand tightened on the key. Then, from the darkness, a soft laugh bubbled up. Not my mother's voice. Not my aunt's. Something older, amused, patient. "You opened it," it whispered. "That is consent." My stomach dropped. The air surged upward in a gust that smelled like rotten pennies. The salt circle around the hatch scattered slightly, grains skittering across concrete. My aunt slammed the hatch shut with both hands and leaned her weight onto it. "Hold it," she barked at me. I dropped to my knees and pressed my palms onto the hatch. The metal felt warm now. Not cold. Warm like skin. Under my hands, the hatch shuddered once. Then again. Like something pushing from below. My aunt poured more salt, frantic now, her steady hands finally shaking. She shoved the salt into the cracks around the hatch ring, muttering words under her breath that sounded like old prayers. The hatch shuddered again. Harder. The ring lifted slightly, then slammed down. Then, suddenly, everything went still. The cold returned to the cellar, sharp and clean. The smell faded like a door closing in your nose. My aunt stayed pressed to the hatch for a long moment, breathing hard. Then she sat back pale. "Do not open it again," she whispered. I nodded, tears burning my eyes. We left the cellar and she locked the cellar door upstairs, then wedged a heavy cabinet in front of it like we were barricading a storm. For a while it worked. Weeks passed. The months. I started to believe the hatch had been sealed, the boundary restored. Until one night, long after my aunt stopped checking in, I woke up to a sound in my bedroom. Not the cellar. Not downstairs. In my room. A soft tapping. 3 taps. Fuzz. 3 taps. I sat up, heart racing, and my eyes landed on the corner of my room. My closet door was open a few inches. And from inside the darkness of my closet, a voice whispered in my mother's tone, sweet and familiar. I found you. The words hit me like ice water. I found you. My body went rigid in bed, lungs refusing to work for a second. The room was dark except for the faint glow of my alarm clock, and that glow made the closet gap look deeper than it should have been. The air in the room smelled faintly of damp earth, like the cellar had climbed the stairs without making a sound. 3 taps came again from inside the closet. Tap, tap, tap. Fuzz. Tap, tap, tap. It was the same rhythm from the hatch. The same polite patience. Like whatever was behind the closet door believed manners would make me open it. I did not answer. I remembered my aunt's voice. Your job is to stay silent. My throat burned with the effort. The closet door creaked 1 inch wider. No hand appeared. No shadow stepped out. Just the slow movement of wood as if pulled by a gentle, invisible finger. The smell of pennies crept into my nose. My eyes watered. Grief and fear mixed into something that felt like nausea. My mother's voice came again, softer now, shaped like comfort. Come here. You do not have to be afraid. I missed you. The worst part was how accurate it was. Not just the sound of her voice, but the cadence, the warmth, the exact way she used to stretch the word missed like it was a hug. My hands clenched the blanket so hard my knuckles ached. I stared at the closet, willing it to stop moving. It opened another inch. Then I saw something in the darkness behind my hanging shirts. The pale shape. Not a face. Not yet. More like a suggestion of skin, barely visible, as if someone stood just out of reach of the light and leaned forward to be noticed. My mouth went dry. I forced my eyes away from the closet and looked at my bedroom door instead, because the simple act of leaving felt safer than staring. But when I swung my legs off the bed, the floor under my feet was cold in a way that felt wrong. Not nighttime cold. Stone cold. Cellar cold. The alarm clock glowed 2:26. Of course it did. The tapping in the closet stopped. A silence pressed down, heavy and expectant, like the house was listening for my next move. I stood slowly, barefoot, and took 1 careful step toward the bedroom door. Behind me, from inside the closet, my mother's voice changed. Not to anger. To disappointment. Why are you ignoring me? The sentence landed wrong. The words were my mother's, but the feeling under them was not. It wasn't concern. It was entitlement, like something that believed it deserved my attention. I kept moving 1 step at a time. The closet door creaked wider with every step I took away, like it was opening itself to follow. Then I heard a soft sound that made my stomach turn. A wet inhale. Close. Too close. Like it was breathing the air of my bedroom, tasting it. My hand reached the doorknob. I turned it. The door did not open. It wasn't locked. I knew it wasn't. I never locked my bedroom door. But it didn't budge, as if the frame had swollen shut or something on the other side pressed against it with steady force. My pulse roared in my ears. My mother's voice came again, sweet now, coaxing. If you open the door, you will wake up. This is just a dream. That was the trap. The moment you start debating reality, you start negotiating. And negotiating was how it got you. I swallowed and forced myself to do the only thing my aunt had drilled into me without saying it outright. I did not speak. I turned my back on the bedroom door and looked at the closet. The door was open halfway now. Inside, my clothes hung still, but the darkness behind them moved like a slow tide. A shape leaned forward. A head-shaped silhouette, too smooth, too round. Then something pale slid into the faint clock glow. A cheek. A forehead. Not my mother's face, but a face trying very hard to be. The features looked soft and unfinished, like clay pressed into the idea of a person. The eyes were the worst. They were familiar in shape, but empty of the tiny details that make someone real. They reflected light without warmth. My mother's voice came from that almost face, perfectly synced to the mouth that barely moved. You finally looked. The almost face smiled. And the smile was wrong because it was too still, like the skin didn't know how to bend naturally. My legs trembled. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then the closet darkness shifted again and I saw what it was actually doing. It was not stepping out. It was extending, like a tunnel unrolling into my bedroom. The closet was becoming a throat. The air got warmer, breath warm, and the smell of damp earth thickened. A memory hit me hard and fast. My aunt kneeling by the hatch, pouring salt, saying the key was not to lock it but to remind it. I did not have the salt bag in my bedroom, but I did have the key. It sat on my nightstand where I had left it months ago, mostly forgotten, mostly treated like a superstition I was embarrassed to still keep. I moved without taking my eyes off the closet. One step sideways. The closet darkness reacted, flowing a fraction closer, like it could sense intention. I reached back and grabbed the key from the nightstand. The metal felt cold, then immediately warmed in my palm, like it recognized the proximity of the thing that wanted the door. The almost face watched me, smiling. My mother's voice softened. "That will not help you." I lifted the key and held it out between me and the closet. Not like a weapon, like a boundary marker. My mouth wanted to speak, to demand, to curse, to scream. But I remembered what my aunt said. Stay silent. So I did something else. I pointed the key at the closet the way you point a finger at a dog and tell it to sit without words. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the clock glow seemed to dim. The closet darkness paused, as if it had hit resistance. The almost face blinked too slowly, and the smile faltered. A new sound came from the closet, low and wet, like something beneath the voice was shifting, annoyed. My mother's voice tried again, sweeter, more urgent. "Put it down. Come here, please." The word please did not sound like pleading. It sounded like a command dressed up as kindness. I tightened my grip on the key until it hurt. The closet darkness pulled back a fraction, then surged forward again, testing the line. The almost face leaned closer, and the breath-warm air rolled over my skin. I could see now that the face was not attached to a body the way a person is. It was forming at the front edge of the darkness like a mask held up to a hole. Behind it, deeper inside the closet throat, something moved. Something long. Something that dragged softly against the floor. The tapping started again, but not from the closet. From behind me. On my bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. Fuzz. Tap, tap, tap. My stomach dropped. It had found more than one way in. The closet darkness seemed to smile again, and my mother's voice grew calm. "If you do not open the door to me, I will open another door." The tapping at the window grew a little louder. My hands shook so hard the key rattled. I backed toward the bedroom window, never taking my eyes off the closet. The tapping stopped the moment I got close, like it wanted me to notice the silence. I reached out with my free hand and touched the curtain. It was damp. Not from condensation. Damp like wet fingers had brushed it repeatedly. My skin crawled. I pulled the curtain aside. The glass was fogged from the outside. Letters were traced in the fog, slow, neat, deliberate. Downstairs my breath hitched. The message wasn't a threat. It was a direction. Like it was steering me. Like it wanted me to go back to the cellar. That was when I understood the shape of the trap. The closet was not the goal. The window was not the goal. Those were pressures. Hurting. It wanted me to move through the house. It wanted me to go where the real door was. The hatch. The staircase. The place it lived. My mother's voice came again, lower now, less patient. "Bring the key." The closet darkness swelled slightly, and the almost face began to change, smoothing into something more recognizable. More like her. More convincing. I felt a sharp sting behind my eyes as grief flared, because part of me wanted it to be true even as terror insisted it wasn't. That longing was the soft spot it would bite through. I forced myself to act. I kept the key in my fist and moved to my bedroom door again. I pressed my shoulder to it and shoved. This time, it opened. Not because the lock changed. Because whatever had held it had released, confident I was doing what it wanted. The hallway outside was dark. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, as if the cellar draft had climbed into the upstairs. From downstairs, I heard the tapping. Not on the hatch. On the cellar door handle. Tap, tap, tap. Fuzz. Tap, tap, tap. like someone tapping politely on wood before entering. My stomach rolled. I did not go down the stairs. Instead, I went to the kitchen. My aunt's salt bag had lived under the sink since that day, half used, forgotten but still there. My hands fumbled the cabinet open. I grabbed the bag and tore it open with shaking fingers. Behind me, in the hallway, I heard a soft sliding sound. The closet was moving again. The darkness was stretching beyond the bedroom, into the hall, as if it didn't need the closet anymore. As if my house itself was becoming the throat. My mother's voice floated from behind me, now closer, like she stood in the hall. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." I did not answer. I poured salt in a thick line across the kitchen doorway. Then another across the base of the stairs leading down. My hands shook so badly the salt spilled unevenly, but I kept pouring until the lines looked like bright white scars on the floor. The tapping downstairs stopped. For a moment, silence pressed in. Then something heavy shifted below. A slow drag against wood. Like furniture being moved. Or like a body being pulled up steps. My skin went cold. I backed away from the stairs, clutching the salt bag and the key. My mind raced, looking for something else to do, some step I had missed. Then I remembered the other thing my aunt had done. Not just salt. The key, she said, was to remind it did not own the door. A reminder needs a place to be placed. I moved back to the cellar door at the top of the basement steps. The cabinet we had wedged there months ago was still in place. I shoved it aside with a grunt, panic lending strength. The cellar door handle was cold in my hand. From below, the tapping came again, right against the door. Tap, tap, tap. The sound traveled through the wood into my palm. I swallowed, tasting pennies. I placed the brass key against the cellar door like I was pinning a symbol to it. Then I poured salt in a thick line across the threshold of the cellar stairs, filling every crack where the draft used to breathe. The tapping stopped instantly. A silence followed that felt like the pause before anger. Then, from directly beneath the cellar door, a voice rose. Not my mother's voice. Not my aunt's. Something deeper, amused and irritated. "You cannot barricade your own foundation," it said. The words vibrated through the door. My arms shook. I said nothing. The voice sighed, and the whole house seemed to exhale with it. The floorboards under my feet creaked, not from settling but from pressure. Then the voice spoke again, softer, almost friendly. "You opened me once. That means you know the way." The pressure shifted. The draft strengthened. The air under the cellar door grew warmer, breath warm, like it was pushing up. A new sound began. Scratching. Not on wood. On concrete. Deep below, under the hatch. Like nails trying to find the edge of stone again. My stomach turned. The salt lines on the stairs shimmered faintly in the dim light, as if the air around them was bending. The voice, now my mother's again, whispered through the door with heartbreaking gentleness. "Just come down and see. Then you can leave." That was the most dangerous offer of all. See then leave. Because seeing was how it counted you in. I backed away from the cellar door, still holding the salt and the key, and I did the only thing that felt like choosing life over pride. I left the house. Barefoot, no coat, keys in my fist, salt bag under my arm, I ran out into the cold night and down the driveway until my lungs burned. I did not stop until I was under the streetlight by the main road. My breath came in white bursts. My feet hurt from gravel. My hands shook so hard the key clinked against my knuckles. Behind me, across the field, the farmhouse sat dark and still. Then, in one upstairs window, a light flicked on. Not my light. A warm, yellow glow that made the house look occupied. A silhouette appeared behind the glass. A woman's shape. My mother's posture. She raised a hand and pressed it to the window, like she was watching me run away. Then her face leaned close to the glass. Even from this distance, I could see the smile was too wide. I turned and kept walking until the sky started to lighten with dawn. By the time the sun rose, I was at my aunt's house, shaking on her porch like a stray. She opened the door and took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. She only said, "It found a new door." I nodded, unable to speak. She pulled me inside, shut the door, and immediately poured salt across her own threshold without looking embarrassed. Then she held my face in her hands, eyes fierce. "Listen to me," she said. "You do not go back alone." I told her I wasn't going back at all. She stared at me a long moment, then nodded. That afternoon, we drove back together with two men from town who owed my aunt favors and didn't ask why. They brought boards, nails, and concrete mix. We went down into the root cellar. The hatch ring was warm, warmer than it should have been. The concrete around it was scratched raw, circles of fresh gouges like something had been clawing from below for hours. The men saw the scratches and went pale, but they didn't leave. Not yet. My aunt poured salt until the floor looked snow-covered, then had them mix concrete and pour it over the hatch ring, sealing it under a thick gray slab. As the concrete spread, the knocking started below. Not polite now. Angry. The hatch shuddered under the wet concrete, making ripples on the surface like a heartbeat. One of the men crossed himself. My aunt didn't. She just kept pouring and smoothing until the ring disappeared completely. The knocking continued for a full minute after the last patch was covered. Then abruptly it stopped. The cellar air went cold, sharp and clean, like winter. For a moment, we all stood in silence, breathing hard. Then the men left quickly, refusing coffee, refusing thanks. My aunt and I stood alone in the root cellar, staring at the fresh concrete. "You think that ends it?" I whispered. My aunt's face was tired. "It ends the easy way," she said. Then she looked at me. "You never open strange doors again. You never follow familiar voices into unfamiliar dark. You understand?" I nodded. I sold the farmhouse within the month. I did not disclose the hatch. I did not disclose the cellar. I told myself that was selfish, but the alternative was sounding insane, and I was too tired to be honest in a way that would ruin me. On my last night there, I slept in my truck on the side of the road, watching the house from a distance. At 2:26 a.m., a single upstairs light flicked on. A silhouette appeared at the window. It pressed a hand to the glass. Then, slowly, it lifted its other hand and waved. Not frantic. Not angry. Patient. Like it knew time was long and people forget rules. I drove away before dawn. Sometimes, still, when I wake in the early hours and the house is too quiet, I hear 3 soft taps somewhere in the distance. On a window. On a pipe. On my own thoughts. Tap, tap, tap. Fuzz. Tap, tap, tap. And I hold my breath and stay silent, because silence is the only lock I trust now. And because I know this much with absolute certainty. Some doors do not want to be opened. They want to be remembered.